Everybody, good evening and welcome to the third planning committee of this month. Before we start the meeting, I have a few housekeeping announcements to make. First of all, there is no planned fire alarm test today. If you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is at St John's Churchyard off Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area in that direction. There's a refreshment machine over there for members of the public to use in the waiting area outside this room. Finally, please switch your mobile phone to silent whilst in the meeting room. This meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Members of the public are welcome to film, audio record, photograph or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. I'd ask you to please be considerate of other people in the room if you do so, and please take care not to disturb the proceedings. If you are filming the meeting, please do not film the audience, only the committee. The code for accessing the Council's Wi-Fi is capital F, little r, 33, capital W, little I, little f, little I, exclamation mark. During the meeting, members of the committee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of this meeting, send or receive emails, texts, messages or tweets concerning the business of the committee. I would also like to remind speakers to use their microphones when speaking, as the only audio from the microphone is captured for the live streaming. And do not place your mobile devices next or particularly near to the microphones to avoid interference. And finally, we've got a very packed agenda, so when people are addressing the committee, please be as concise as you can in your questions and statements. Have we received any apologies for the meeting?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Camberwell and Councillor Soames for absence.
Confirmation of voting members. Will those members of the committee indicate by raising their hands? So there's 6 voting members. Notification of any items of business which the Chair deems urgent. We've had an addendum report and members' pack which have been circulated. I'd also like to inform the meeting that we will be hearing the development items in the following order. Item 8.3 on the Burgess Business Park and Parkhouse Street at London SE5 7TJ. Then item 8.1 Zone L Canada Water Master Plan, Surrey Quays Road. And then finally 8.2 Zone F Canada Water Master Plan, Surrey Quays Road. Disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare an interest or dispensation in respect to any item or issue to be considered at this meeting? I'm going to take these in order. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make you aware that the ward that I represent is partially covered by the Canada Water Master Plan. However, I am going into this with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Whittam.
Ditto.
Councillor Roberts.
Same for me.
Thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting. So we've got the minutes for, it's not quite the previous meeting, but the one that was held on the 11th of July. They need to be amended to reflect that Councillor Newins attended the meeting as a reserve. Does the committee agree to approve the minutes with that amendment?
Agree.
Thank you. That brings us to item 6 on the agenda, the Article 4 direction to withdraw the permitted development rights for the demolition of number 41 Linden Grove, which is on pages 6 to 32 of the main agenda pack. Before we start this item, I'd just like to inform the committee of the following. We don't normally hear representations from members of the public when decisions made about Article 4 reports. However, following a request by representatives of the owners of the property in question, I've decided to make an exception in this case and allow them to address the committee for 3 minutes after we've listened to the officer's presentation and asked the officer questions. Okay, Michael Secouris to introduce.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. The proposal we are presenting to the committee today relates to 41 Linden Grove in SE15. During the planning process, and in accordance with the NPPF, the council has recognised that this property is an undesignated heritage asset. And because 41 Linden Grove is not in a conservation area, nor likely to be statutorily listed, the council is proposing to place an immediate Article 4 direction on the property, removing the potential for it to be demolished without an acceptable planning permission for its replacement. Number 41 Linden Grove is a well-proportioned, three-storey early Victorian villa of simple classical style and a clear hierarchy and symmetrical composition. The building is located on the north side of Linden Grove, which forms the main entrances to Nunhead Cemetery nearby, which is Grade 2 listed park and a conservation area in its own right. The council is currently considering a planning applications for the redevelopment of the site for residential scheme, providing a four-storey flatted block. The application reference is 21 AP 3580. However, the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order allows for the demolition of buildings outside conservation areas without planning permission, in effect clearing the site without the need for planning permission. As such, number 41 Linden Grove could be demolished prior to the council determining the current application or a planning application for its replacement. And considering any further planning application which might come forward. So the proposal before you is to place an immediate Article 4.1 direction on the property, removing the potential for the building to be demolished without a planning permission in place. Article 4 directions can be used to remove specific permitted development rights, and it doesn't restrict development. It doesn't mean it doesn't have any other effect on this. It doesn't predetermine any decision that the council may make on any development going forward. It simply takes the permitted development opportunity out without the need for planning, without the need for a planning permission. So in this instance, it would simply be removing the right of the owner to demolish the property without a planning permission, and that's all that's being requested of you today. The report sets out the various stages, but simply put, we'd go through. We're at stage one. This is stage one. So the decision making for you to make the decision, if you're so minded, to place the make the direction and place the Article 4 direction on the property. Then we go to publication and consultation, and then during that period also notification of the Secretary of State, and finally confirmation of the Article 4, which is the stage-by-stage process that's in place. If the Council does not confirm within 6 months, the Article 4 direction then lapses. Members are directed to the portion of the report which also sets out the right for compensation, which is set out in the Act in these instances, and the property owner has the right for to claim for compensation for losses arising due to the removal of permitted development rights, which they might have, which lead to a loss that they might have already have in place, to a gain that they might already have in place. In this instance, there is no planning permission, which might have resulted in a measurable gain, and the withdrawal of the permitted development rights is simply the loss of the opportunity to demolish the property, and not to restrict on the development. So in conclusion, officers are recommending that the Planning Committee approves an immediate Article 4.1 direction for number 41 Linden Grove, approves the consultation be undertaken for a period of 6 weeks in relation to the immediate Article 4.1 direction, and notes the qualities analysis of the proposed Article 4 direction, which is appended to the report. Also appended to the report is a draft Article 4 direction, the actual direction that would be placed, and there's a map as well of the property which would be affected. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, any questions to Michael? No questions? Thank you. In that case, the owners of the property, are you in the room? If so, could you come forward and sit at the table in front of us, please, so that you've got the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to speak.
Friends,
So yes.
that's it? Yeah. Friends, I don't lack energy or ambition. My front hedge is testament to what I'm trying to become to the neighborhood. The scaffold was put up in 1988 when our huge tree blew down and damaged the gutters at high level in the front of the house and became another job waiting on money. I agree the home has an impressive and imposing look, which has become a disguise for the real and unknown issues that plague the property. The public don't see when the local squirrel is chewing my electrics on the top floor. I don't have to tell you about the persistence of the pigeons. The public don't see that my fine-looking left-hand boundary wall is sliding off the course below because of the level difference with next-door garage. The public would not know that one L-shaped corner of my living room ceiling tapers from 2.5 inches thick plaster in an effort to level it. The public don't know that the floor to ceiling in my basement, I have one wall 2.5 inches out of plumb. I suspect the impressive-looking front elevation has dry rot at its core at the right-hand side of the front door. I have a crack in the basement towards the middle of the wall, which carries movement, which is sometimes wide enough to see into the other room. The lovely front you see has a window left of front door where one side of the brickwork is 1.2 inches lower than the other side. These things would show up in a renovation. I am not selling to an irresponsible body that will pull down the area, but one that will bring you a future that will enhance and raise the bar for Nunhead's prestige, as I am not able to do. It is my honest judgment, after a lifetime of experience, that a new start where you maximize what can be achieved by adding in today's technology in terms of energy efficiency instead of a coat of paint and patchwork that brings you back here 15 years' time. I am 68 in December, and although I enjoy perfect health, I do not have enough qualifying years to receive a state pension yet. So even without these rulings, I have a fight on my hands. I must be looking to what home I leave behind for my wife and 2 children. And the council did not even have the courtesy to write to me about this, even though it has such far-reaching effects. When 40 years ago we started the addition on the side of the house and then called for your help, your answer was, "We have started, so we can't help." And now, on the verge of a sale, you have come to scupper my progress. So now you want me to become yet another sad tale of the Windrush generation. I am hoping that the injustice of the suggestion to place this order will be recognized. My bank account can tell you that my words are honest. I have no money. Consider the council's heavy machinery on this one family.
Excuse
Who
me.
pleads our case? This is the
sir.
last paragraph.
Sorry, sir.
Who-
The 3 minutes has come to an end. I've let you run slightly over because you were speaking very passionately. But if you could stop there. Are there any questions from the committee? Councillor Johnson.
I wondered if there are any further points you would like to make.
If any,
Further points you would like to make, if you'd like to finish your comment.
I would love to use that to finish this. Consider the council's heavy machinery on this one family, who pleads our case, who knows our pain, who judges this with compassion. The voice of the suffering poor need to be heard and understood. The council need to look at the implications of its actions. Fairness and due diligence must be in the midst. We ask for your understanding as you reflect. We hope that in your deliberation, you will remember us. We are not the enemy. We are the friend that is looking to you. And it is you we turn to now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Councillor Papula?
I just want further detail as to when you found out from the council. You mentioned that you found out on the verge of the sale, but could you just give me further detail as to, firstly, when you found out, and also what the correspondence was with the council?
I found out, it feels like 4 days ago, from my buyer. And I have heard nothing from the council. And it does not feel right. And also, at first, they were not allowing me to speak. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Whittam.
Do you understand that this does not stop your development?
Well, I am trying to do a sale, but the property is of such that it's a developer that would be interested in it, which means, so to maximize their outlay, they would want to knock it down and create more flats because it is a detached home with the potential of more space.
But they just have to apply for planning permission to demolish.
Yeah, they have been in a process for a year, and but then this has suddenly come up, which is a spanner in the works.
But do you understand that we have to protect our heritage as well?
Yes, I am a builder, and I can appreciate that, and I agree, as I said, that the home has an imposing look, and so on. So I can understand that. Forget my point. I think, what is it? Being a builder, I am always into repairs. And so I believe that we are meant to repair when we can, but that property, you can't economically repair it. Yes, Heritage can take it on and make it work with a bigger purse, but there is no chance of my being able to do it. And I, at no stage was my finance in a way that I could tackle it. And I don't mean nobody waits till they have all the money, but I had nothing to make a start, because even just to keep it going without an improvement, that is a big task, you see? So, yeah, so that's where we're at, yeah.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Have you considered the possibility of selling the property to someone who will be willing to do the repairs and renovations required? Has that been explored as a possibility?
No, but in the light of the buyer been in touch with the council for a year, and how fair is that to them and their efforts, and having dealt with them for that year, then I can see that their quality has stood out before me. You know, we're not dealing with some group of shysters or, you know, a negative group in any shape or form. I am confident that this buyer, the firm, will deliver for you something excellent. So there is that to it too, you know. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and thank you everybody thank you for your answers to the committee. We're going to now consider this and discuss the matter with officers. If you could return to your seat before, but thank you very much for coming forward, and I apologise for the short notice of this meeting, and so thank you for making the time to come and talk to us today. It's been very helpful to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Leave.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the committee? Councillor Papula.
I want to quickly ask, again, it's the consultation question that's been mentioned by the resident that he only found out 4 days prior. Could you give me further details about consultation, both with the resident and also the developer as well?
Thank you, Chair. Well, the consultation, the planning application has been publicised and consulted on widely, and there's a fulsome report in relation to that consultation. This report coming to this committee will have been notified. The affected stakeholders would have been notified as part of the normal publication of the agenda of this committee. So that's the reason why everybody was notified, just like every other item that's on this agenda, just 5 days before the committee met. So that's the nature of the report and the consultation for this specific item. It's no different from any other Article 4 designation. It is normal, and in that respect, it's short. It's very short period and acknowledged by the chair, but it is normal, and the consultation on the designation and the direction will follow for at least 6 weeks after this decision tonight. And as outlined in the report, it doesn't preclude any decision that council might make on the planning application, or any planning application which might arise on this property. It simply means that the building can't be demolished without a planning permission in place.
Can I follow that up with 2 questions? First of all, what is the decision-making process after the 6 weeks? If we're consulting for 6 weeks, what's the end decision that's taken, and by whom? The second question is you mentioned the consultation on the planning application for this site, and just to ask whether the heritage value of the building was brought up as a comment in that consultation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the decision is within 6 weeks. The council decides. The council notifies. Legal officers might advise me correct me if I'm wrong, but the council will now notify the Secretary of State and confirm after the 6 weeks confirm the Article 4 designation. Article 4 direction. It's taken by the council. The decision is ultimately taken by the council, and that is with immediate effect. That's the process that we're following here today. And as for the heritage value of the property, it was recognized from the outset at pre-application stage and at application stage. The application is accompanied by a detailed condition survey, which the council is considering, and is all part of the viability and other assessments of the property. This is So this is that's a sort of separate and aside assessment, fulsome assessment of the application.
Councillor Roberts and then Councillor Leeming.
Apologies if I've missed this in the report, but who initiated this process? Is that something that we do, or is it, forgive my ignorance on that?
The council we've initiated that simply because outside conservation areas, there's a lot of public interest in this planning application, planning application, and it's been identified by the local. The buildings have been identified by the locals as local people as a heritage asset, including by the Conservation Area Action Group, Advisory Group, and so it is in the nature of these things that we look at and we think in the round about our heritage, and there is the risk with buildings outside conservation areas, as we had recently with the East Street Baptist Church, where there is the potential that if whatever decision the council might make on the planning application, that the decision is taken to simply demolish the building in order to do away with any issue of heritage, issues associated with the planning permission, and that's the threat, I guess, to the heritage that we're trying to preempt here. So we've acted in our rights as a local planning authority to recognise the heritage value of the property and to take steps to make sure that it isn't demolished without a planning permission.
Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Councillor Livingston. Speaking as the Council's Heritage Champion, I mean, Michael, you know that we are planning to run a local list process at some point this summer. Indeed, I thought it might have started already, where we would seek to run our version of what Historic England have as the listing service. Is this the sort of building that might be identified and added to a Southwark list of heritage buildings, which, I mean, won't have protection, as I understand it, but will at least be marked out as being of heritage value in the borough?
Yes, indeed. This is one of those that would certainly comply with the criteria for selection of local list. It is age and rarity and cultural value that would apply here, and this is certainly a process that we would seek to follow with other locally listed buildings outside conservation areas, as we have done actually elsewhere in the borough, like, for example, the Forge and stables, which were identified in the Old Kent Road area, and Article 4 for their to stop their demolition without a planning permission was put in place then.
Councillor Leeming.
Yeah, there are organisations, Historic England, National Lottery Heritage Fund, and so on, who can provide money for the protection of heritage assets. Is this the sort of building that, if a different route was taken for it in the future, which, in your professional opinion, that a heritage organisation such as those two I've just mentioned might provide some funding to support?
Certainly that might be the case. It would need to be properly considered, and it would have to be, my guess would have to, it would have to be framed around public benefits arising, certainly. If so, that would be a route, definitely, for that. Yeah.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, the resident indicated that he believes that the property was beyond viable renovation, beyond the point of viable renovation. Do we have any independent assessments of how likely it is that the property, if it wasn't demolished, would ultimately end up by falling down or being demolished?
The condition survey suggests that there are issues with the property. There's leaking, typical of properties that have of this age, and it has suffered from some degree of disrepair over time. It doesn't conclude that it's structurally unsound or that it's that it is in danger of falling down. Certainly, there is a resident in it at the moment, and that's not and that there is scaffold in some part of it, but it's certainly not in danger of falling over at the moment. That's what the report that's come in with the application certainly suggests. And in fact, with the application, there was an exploration of the potential for its conversion and extension, but the applications, the developer has in this instance concluded that they would prefer to demolish it and replace it with a brand new development, a environment, like a zero carbon style development. So they have detailed proposals for what they are proposing to replace it with. Yeah.
And agreeing this today wouldn't preclude that coming forward for consideration. It doesn't preclude any demolition. It just can't happen. But this is just preventing demolition happening without a planning application being determined by the committee. Whilst we were discussing those things, Colin helpfully pointed out that after 6 months of the direction coming into effect, a report comes back to planning committee in any case to confirm the situation, whether that's what we want to keep in place, so that people are aware of that. Okay, I don't see any more hands going up. And we've heard the arguments. I think at that point we should be moving towards a motion on this. Are people content that we move to a motion on this item? Thank you. I would like to put forward the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraphs 1 to 3 of the report on page 6 of the main agenda pack, that the planning committee approves an immediate Article 4.1 direction to withdraw the permitted development right granted by the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development England Order 2015, which would otherwise permit the demolition of number 41 Linden Grove that has been identified as a heritage asset. Secondly, approves consultations to be undertaken for a period of 6 weeks in relation to the immediate Article 4.1 direction. And thirdly, notes the equalities analysis of a proposed Article 4.1 direction, which is set out in Appendix C. Does any member of this committee wish to second this? Thank you, Councillor Whittam. We'll now move to a vote. I'm going to call on voting members of this committee by name and ask them to confirm whether voting for, against or wish to abstain on the item. Councillor Whittam.
For, Chair.
For, Chair.
Councillor Leeming.
For, Chair.
Councillor Papula.
For, Chair.
Councillor Roberts.
For, Chair.
And I'm Councillor Livingstone, and I'm voting for the motion. Thank you. The motion's carried. That brings us to item 7 on the agenda, the release of £487,500 £532.15 of Section 106 funding from Green Buildings Fund for its administration, project delivery and management, and carbon offsetting and climate change work, which is set out in pages 33 to 42 and page 1 of the addendum report. I'm going to hand over to Colin to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So, as the Chair's pointed out, the recommendation is that the monies are released to employ 3 officers in total on fixed-term contracts for a period of 2 years to help manage, administer and deliver the Green Buildings Fund as part of the Council's response to the climate change emergency. In the addendum pack, there is a small change to the main report. In the main report, it talks about 3 grade 12 officers. The addendum corrects that. It should be 2 grade 12 officers and 1 grade 11 officer. That's the only change through the addendum. The report then identifies where the carbon offset monies have been collected and where they're contributing to funding those posts and the delivery of the Green Buildings Fund. Just by way of background, the report sets out that the carbon offsetting fund is basically a payment that developers make when they can't get net zero on site. So there is a charge which is associated with that, which was increased about a year ago, and that's also part of the policy approach set out in the new Southwark plan, which was adopted early this year. Cabinet considered reports on climate change emergency in 19th of October 2021, and they set out five things that they would like to see achieved with those offset payments. So they would consolidate the funding from carbon offset into something called the Green Building Fund to maximise opportunities to save CO2. That the Green Building Fund would be spent to deliver projects in accordance with the Council's climate change strategy and action plan. So we also have an action plan with I think about 146 points that it's trying to address and individual actions. And that officers would prepare recommendations with input from relevant cabinet members on which carbon offsetting projects to fund. So there'd be a decision-making process. And that the funding criteria would be agreed by officers and relevant cabinet members, and that officers would in addition seek other funds to help with climate change emergency. And obviously, as money is spent, if it is over £100,000, it comes back to the planning committee anyway. So part of that process is always a check with planning committee. At the moment, we have just over £5.5 million in the Green Building Fund. If you that's money we've collected. If you were to consider money that could be collected with planning permissions that have been granted to date, that could be as high as just over £11.2 million. We can't guarantee that we will collect all that money because not all those planning permissions may be implemented, and some may be amended so that their CO2 savings are actually increased as technology improves. But it's in that region of perhaps doubling the amount of money that we have in that fund at the moment. Policy context is national, regional, local. National is the Climate Change Act 2008. The London Plan obviously commits to net zero as well, and also to the carbon offsetting approach. Southwark Plan 2022, just adopted earlier this year. It's policy P70 that seeks to get on-site operational carbon emissions reduced by 100%, although it does say that in exceptional circumstances we will accept offsetting payments. It's obviously very important that this is done as quickly and effectively as we can manage, and so hence the report is recommending that we use part of it to fund some additional staffing to both take forward the kind of structure of administering that, also making the most of it, and also having that specialist kind of knowledge within the planning team to make sure that we have a most effective and optimised approach to using that money to get the best benefits we can from it. And on that basis, the recommendation is that you agree the release of those monies to employ those 3 staff for a period of 2 years.
Thank you, Colin. Any questions from members? No questions? No comments? In that case, I would like to move us to consider the recommendation. So, as revised, I'd like to move that the Planning Committee approves the release of £487,532.15 of pooled Section 106 carbon offsetting financial contributions from the Council's Green Buildings Fund towards the funding of 3 climate change officer roles, 2 at grade 12 and 1 on grade 11 on 2-year fixed-term contracts. Is that seconded by anybody? Councillor Leeming was the first with his hand. Thank you. Can I move to a vote on that item? Councillor Whittam.
For, Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
For, Chair.
Councillor Leeming.
For, Chair.
Councillor Papula.
For, Chair.
Councillor Roberts.
For, Chair.
And I'm Councillor Livingstone, and I'm voting for that as well. So that motion is agreed. Thank you. That brings us on to the development management items of the agenda. The next item of business concerns determination of planning applications. I'd like to start by reminding everyone of the committee's guidance on the conduct of business. Firstly, officers will present the report, outline their recommendations and answer questions raised by the committee. If present and wishing to speak, the following may then address the committee for no more than 3 minutes each. First of all, a spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. By now, you should have identified a single spokesperson. If there's more than one objector that wishes to speak, the time will be divided equally within the 3-minute slot. Secondly, the applicant or the applicant's agent. Thirdly, a spokesperson representing any supporters of the application who live within 100 metres of a development site. And fourthly, a ward councillor representing the area affected by the proposal. Ward members in attendance and those nominated to speak on behalf of objectors, supporters and applicants should sit in the front row of the public gallery when your turn comes. This is for the ease of communication between the committee and the speaker, in case any issues need to be clarified later in the proceedings. It's not an opportunity to take part in the debate of the committee. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspects of the proposal and should avoid repeating information which is already in the report. The meeting is not a hearing where all participants present evidence to be examined by other participants. At the end of each representation, the committee may ask questions of the presenter. Speakers should lead the committee to subjects in which they would welcome further questioning when they speak to us. After receiving all submissions, the committee will debate the application and consider the recommendation. This is a council committee meeting which is open to the public and there should be therefore no interruptions from the audience. Finally, I'd like to everyone present to know that although the planning committee comprises of members from different political parties, none of the members here are politically whipped and so are all voting on the basis of the evidence that they hear this evening. Our decisions are made in accordance with the Council's planning policy and based on information contained within the relevant reports together with the consultation responses and any verbal submissions made today. How we approach these applications is set out in the Development Management Report, item 8, and if members are happy to note the report, we'll move on to considering the planning applications. Are members happy to note that report? Thank you. That brings us on to, as we announced earlier, we're going to change the order slightly with item 8.3, Burgess Business Park coming first. That brings us to that item. I'd like to hand over to Victoria Lewis to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The site's located on the northeastern side of Southampton Way and measures 1.59 hectares. It contains a series of buildings, some of which are in light industrial and storage use, together with a car wash. 33, 30 and 45 Southampton Way, which are in residential use, a large brick chimney and open areas of parking. The existing buildings contain approximately 12,500 square metres of employment floor space. and at present some 47% of the space is occupied. All of the occupiers are on temporary leases, and an update regarding the existing occupiers is provided in the addendum report. Whilst the site's predominantly in an industrial area, it adjoins residential uses on Southampton Way and Parkhouse Street, and there are houses on the opposite side of Wales Way. Part of the site adjoins Burgess Park to the north, which is metropolitan open land and a site of importance for nature conservation. And there's a wooded area within the park which immediately adjoins the site, which is known as the New Church Road nature area. So that's an aerial image of the site, which is this area around here where my cursor is. That's the largest part of the site, and there's a small section of the site at the back of a terrace of Victorian houses at the top left of the photograph. These are some images of the existing buildings, the view from Wells Way on the top left, 10 to 12 Parkhouse Street on the top right, an existing building which would be converted, Block B on the bottom left, and then that's the yard which adjoins Burgess Park on the bottom right. The site forms a substantial part of what was formerly designated the Parkhouse Street Preferred Industrial Location under the 2011 Core Strategy and 2007 Saved Southwark Plan. And within the PIL, Preferred Industrial Location PIL, only employment uses or sui generis uses were permitted. This application was submitted in April 2021 when these earlier plans were still in use, and as such it was considered at the time to be a departure from these plans because it proposed residential units in an area designated for employment use. And that slide there, the area in purple, shows the extent of the former preferred industrial location, and that's the application site outlined in red. The 2022 Southwark Plan has subsequently been adopted, which replaced these two earlier plans, and the site is now designated for mixed-use development, including replacement employment floor space, housing, retail, community and leisure uses, and these are all under site allocation NSP 25. And that slide here, the hatched outline shows the application site, and the solid red line shows the extent of site allocation NSP 25 in the current Southwark Plan. Following concerns from local residents regarding the lack of a master plan in order to guide developments coming forward in NSP 25, given that this area is in multiple land ownerships, the Council commissioned the Parkhouse Street Local Development Study, or LDS. Whilst it's not a statutory planning document and can't be afforded any weight in the decision-making process, it's proved a useful tool in ensuring that the developments coming forward within this area would work well together to form an attractive new neighbourhood. So this image here shows some of the slides from the Parkhouse Street LDS. On the top left, the red outline shows the extent of the LDS area. The image on the right shows potential for how buildings could be laid out within the area. And the image on the bottom left shows where potential height could be located within the LDS area, where these asterisks are here, here and here. Of note is that the Council has recently granted permission for 2 mixed-use developments within NSP 25, and there are 2 other planning applications which are pending. The 2 permissions which have been granted are at 21 to 23 and 25 to 33 Parkhouse Street. The permission at 21 to 23, that was a council's own scheme, and that's for employment floor space and 33 residential units within 2 buildings of 5 to 10 stories high. And the permission at 25 to 33 Parkhouse Street is for employment floor space and 109 residential units within buildings, a building ranging from 6 to 11 stories high. And full details are provided in Appendix 3 of the officer report. So this image here just shows the location of the permissions. So this is the first one here where my cursor is. That was a council scheme. That's at 21 to 23 Parkhouse Street. This one to the right where my cursor is now, that's 25 to 33 Parkhouse Street. We have an application pending to the right of that, and we have another application pending at the bottom left. So developments are starting to come forward within this area. And this image here shows the 2 schemes which have permission. So the council scheme is on the left, where my cursor is now, 21 to 23. And this image with the buildings in the white, that's 25 to 33, and they both have planning permission. Also of note is that the site was subject to an earlier planning application for a comprehensive redevelopment, and this was refused by the Planning Committee in 2018, and it was subsequently dismissed as an appeal following public inquiry. This previous application predated the LDS, and the council refused permission on the grounds of loss of industrial floor space and residential accommodation not being of a sufficient quality to justify the density proposed. And full details of this previous application are at paragraphs 40 to 45 of the officer report. The planning inspector who dealt with the appeal found that the loss of employment floor space would be acceptable, but concluded that too many compromises had been made regarding residential quality, and that there would have been harm to the character and appearance of the area, and an unacceptable loss of daylight and sunlight to some properties on Park House Street and Wells Way. This previous application is described in the report as the appeal scheme. The application now before members therefore seeks to address the concerns raised by the inspector in the appeal decision, and also to address the guidance which is set out in the local development study, the LDS. Given the scale of the application, it's accompanied by an environmental statement, or ES. So planning permission is now sought by Peach2 Services for a comprehensive redevelopment. The existing residential buildings, 33 and 45 Southampton Way, would be retained. An existing brick chimney would be retained, and the building next to 21 to 23 Park House Street would be retained, and all of the other structures would be demolished. There would be just over 5,000 square metres of Class E floor space and 112 square metres of Class F floor space, laid out in a series of 12 buildings ranging from 2 to 13 storeys in height. Class E floor space is commercial, business and service uses, and Class F is local community and learning uses. Most of the development will be located on the larger southern part of the site, which sits to the south, with 2 blocks located on the smaller part of the site adjoining Burgess Park. On the larger part of the site, the buildings will be arranged around a new public square, which is described as the Garden Square, and would include the retained chimney. There would be 2 new streets leading to the square, the Garden Street, which would start close to Wells Way, and there would be a smaller secondary street described as the Mews, connecting Park House Street to the Garden Square. The Mews would be the focus of the commercial floor space within the development. A number of amendments have been made to the plans during the course of the application, including reducing the number of residential units, increasing the Class E floor space, omitting an extension from proposed Block B, and these changes are set out at paragraphs 36 to 39 of the officer report. So I'll very quickly take you through the slides here. This just shows the layout. This is the smaller part of the site here. We've got Block A, which is 4 houses, Block B, which is an existing building, which would be retained in commercial use. And then the other buildings are focused around the new Garden Square here. These areas in white would be new streets leading through into the site. So we've got the Garden Square at the bottom part of the site, and the Mews, which would be the commercial street slightly above that. The tallest building would be Block H, the 13-storey tower where my cursor is now. This is a first floor plan, and it's just included to show that these that some of the commercial spaces would span 2 levels. So the areas in white where my cursor is now would be double height commercial spaces. Above this, from second floor level upwards, it would all be residential. There'd be podium gardens connecting these 2 blocks, and there'd be a footbridge over the Mews to allow residents to access between the 2. This image shows the building heights. This is included in the officer report. In general, the heights are concentrated at the centre of the site with a 13-storey tower dropping down to the edges with a 1 to 2-storey block A near to the park, and 4 storeys running parallel with with Wells Way. This image on the left-hand side just shows the proposed play provision within the site, which would be for all age groups within the development, a variety of spaces, and most of that would be in the public realm. And this image on the right-hand side shows the proposed servicing routes. So a key move since the appeal decision is since the appeal scheme is to push the servicing to the edge of the site, so that there wouldn't have to be any vehicles coming through the Garden Square and the Garden Street, which is one of the criticisms of the appeal scheme. These images show some of the views along Park House Street and Wells Way, with the building heights generally around 6 storeys with a set back 7th floor to the edges of the site and stepping up in the middle. This shows an image from Coleman Road, which is to the east of the site, buildings in the background. This image here is from Southampton Way, so showing proposed Block B, which is a new building, which should be, an existing building which should be converted. This is an image of the garden square focused on the retained chimney, and that's looking north towards Parkhouse Street and Burgess Park. This is an image of the garden street, which would incorporate a play street within the public realm. And this is a view of the commercial mews, which is the focus for the commercial space within the development. The footbridge for the gardens in the background there, and the chimney beyond that. This is an image of the houses for proposed Block A on the left-hand side of the image, and then in the background you can just see the converted building, which would be Block B. These show some images of the units fronting the garden street, some of the other units, Block F and L within the development, and an image of the proposed tower. And these images here are from a townscape and visual impact assessment, which show the outlines of the buildings in blue as viewed from various vantage points, predominantly from Burgess Park. There's some more here, including in relation to the spire of St George's Church, former St George's Church, and Collingwood House, which is on Cottage Green. With regard to land uses, the mix of uses would comply with NSP 25 and can be supported. The proposal would deliver a significant number of much needed new homes, which is welcomed. NSP 25 requires each development to retain or increase the existing amount of employment floor space, which would not be achieved in this instance. The applicant wishes to deliver a proportion of the Class E floor space as food, drink and retail. Therefore, the total employment floor space would be just over 4,500 square metres, or a 43% re-provision compared to what's there at the moment. This would result in a loss of almost 6,000 square metres when following the appeal decision approach of not requiring the employment space in 10 to 12 Parkhouse Street to be replaced, because that has an extant prior approval in place for change of use to residential. Policy P30 of the Southwark Plan says that loss of employment floor space can be permitted in exceptional circumstances where 2 years of marketing has been undertaken to demonstrate that there's no demand. However, this requirement was introduced by the new Southwark Plan, and as noted there earlier, this application was submitted when the core strategy and Save Southwark Plan was still in force, and there were no such marketing requirements under these earlier plans. The financial viability of providing different amounts of employment floor space and affordable housing has been independently tested on behalf of the council. The development would deliver 137 affordable homes, comprising 84 social rented units and 53 shared ownership, and this would equate to 35.4% affordable housing by habitable room with a policy compliant tenure split. This wouldn't be financially viable, but the developer has committed to providing it in any event, and it would be secured through the Section 106 agreement. Policy IP3 of the Southwark Plan makes it clear that where a site cannot viably meet all of the land use requirements of the site allocation, that the delivery of affordable housing should be prioritised. Delivering more employment space on the site would reduce the amount of delivering more employment floor space on the site would reduce the amount of affordable housing which could be delivered. Therefore, the reduction in employment floor space on the site can be supported in this instance, given the outcome of the viability testing. And we've got Jacob Cook from Avers & Young, if you have any questions on viability. So we recognise there'd be a big loss of employment floor space, but the new space would be of a high quality. It would include 20% affordable workspace, which would be more than the 10% policy requirement, which is welcomed. There are currently no permanent jobs at the site, and the proposal could support up to 80 permanent jobs within an attractive new development, or potentially more than that if the space was used more intensively. The space has been designed for light industrial uses, but could accommodate more intense uses if required, which would result in more jobs. The proposal would also deliver 779 square metres more employment floor space than under the appeal scheme. Sorry, it's logged out. I'll come back to that. An equality assessment's been undertaken, and members are referred to additional information in the addendum. There could be a negative impact in relation to race on account of the loss of the Continental Car Wash, which currently operates from the site because the owner is from an ethnic minority background with Eastern European employees. There are no proposals to accommodate this business within the development, therefore it would have to relocate. So it's recommended that clauses are included in the Section 106 agreement to provide some relocation assistance to that business should they require it, and any other of the existing businesses should they be proven to have to share in protected characteristics, and that would all be secured in the legal agreement. The proposal is of high quality design. It would adopt a warehouse aesthetic and it would broadly follow the guidance in the LDS with the new buildings around an attractive square, focusing on the retained chimney. The 2 new streets would improve permeability across the site, and there are currently no routes through the site at all. With the exception of the 13-storey tower, compared to the appeal scheme, the building heights across the development have generally been reduced, and we now consider that they would have an acceptable impact on the surrounding townscape and the nearby heritage assets. The 13-storey tower is over 30 metres high, so it's classed as a tall building, and whilst that does not fully accord with the locational tests in the Southwark Plan's tall building policy, it's concluded that it would not have any significant harm, and the identified benefits of the scheme and material considerations which can outweigh this in this instance. I just need to log back in, I think. I wanted to show you a few more slides. Okay, so these slides here just give you an impression of the appeal scheme. So on the left-hand side, that was the appeal scheme layout. So you haven't got the garden square that was there. It was a shared route for servicing vehicles and pedestrians through this main part of the site. Block L here was much longer. So some key moves have been made to address the comments raised by the inspector and from the LDS, as I explained earlier. And this image on the right-hand side just shows Block A, and its proposed Block A and its relationship with Burgess Park. It's been pulled slightly further away from the park. The appeal scheme is the one hatched in blue. And this is an image here. The LDS potential image is shown on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side is the application proposal, which just sort of demonstrates that it's followed the guidance fairly closely. There are currently 21 trees on the site and 1 group of trees. 12 trees will need to be removed, including 5 category Bs, but 53 new trees would be planted within a new high-quality public realm. The site's largely devoid of any greenery at the moment, lots of hard surfacing, so that would be a big improvement in terms of biodiversity and ecology. We've considered the impacts on Burgess Park in terms of ecology. The council commissioned an independent ecological report, and that found that subject to mitigation through conditions and some contributions, that there wouldn't be any adverse impacts on the park, and that we could fund, so the developments could fund some additional habitat creation, and that's all set out in the report. Quality of accommodation, all of the units would meet the minimum floor space requirements, 45% would exceed them by more than 10%. All of the wheelchair units would meet the larger sizes within the council's SPD. 76% of them would be dual aspect, which compares to 67% under the appeal scheme, and 78.5% would comply with the BRE guidance for internal daylight levels. They'd all have private amenity space. Each block would have communal amenity space, and any private shortfalls would be made up for in the communal provision. The play space requirements would be met on site, and most of it would be in the public realm, which would be a positive aspect of the proposal. And the dwellings would be constructed to ensure they would be adequately soundproof to limit the potential for noise complaints against existing occupiers. Overall, we consider that the quality of accommodation now proposed is of a very high standard and addresses the concerns raised by the appeal decision. There would be a policy-compliant amount of wheelchair-accessible housing, and whilst the proposal would only provide 20.3% three-bed dwellings rather than the 25% now required by the Southwark Plan, the 20.3% complied with the core strategy, which was in force when the planning application was submitted. The environmental statement identifies some adverse impacts which are detailed in the officer report, including during construction, so construction management plans will be required, and some impacts on daylight and sunlight to neighbouring properties, but these would generally be less than the appeal scheme and are considered to be acceptable when weighed in the balance with the other benefits and disbenefits of the proposal. 89.6% of the neighbouring homes would comply with the BRE guidance for vertical sky component, 89% for no skyline, and 94% for sunlight, which represents a very high level of compliance. Only one property at 13 Parkhouse Street would experience overshadowing to its garden, with the impact being 26.9% reduction, which wouldn't be significantly beyond the 20% recommended in the BRE guidance. I've nearly finished. The proposal will provide 14 accessible parking spaces. Future occupiers will be prevented from getting parking permits on the surrounding streets. And whilst there'd be additional vehicle trips, these wouldn't adversely impact on the surrounding highway network. And Section 106 contributions would be required, including for bus improvements in the local area. The proposal would include air source heat pumps and photovoltaic panels, and carbon dioxide emissions would be reduced by 61.8%, and a contribution to the council's offset fund would be secured through the Section 106 agreement. Circular economy and whole life carbon have been taken into account, and the proposal would achieve an urban greening factor of 0.4, which would comply with the London plan. It would be air quality neutral, and impacts relating to ground conditions, flood risk, wind, microclimate, fire, digital connectivity, archaeology, socio-economics and health have all been considered and are found to be acceptable, subject to conditions and planning obligations. Overall, it's considered that the concerns raised by the appeal scheme, aided by the LDS, have been addressed, and that the benefits of the proposal, including high-quality workspace and 375 new homes, including 137 affordable homes, would outweigh any potential harm caused. It's therefore recommended that planning permissions granted, subject to conditions, a Section 106 agreement, referral to the GLA and notifying the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you. Any points of clarification committee members have? Stun them into silence, sorry. That's pretty unusual. Okay, in that case, can we move on to any objectors that wish to speak? I understand we've got Claire Sharp in the room. Claire, if you and anybody else that wishes to speak, if you could come forward to the front table. Okay, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourselves, and then you'll have 3 minutes to address the meeting. And as I explained earlier, you can divide the 3 minutes between you, or if one of you wants to speak, but if you're both there for questions, that's fine as well. Could we just take your names first?
Yes, thank you. I am Claire Sharp. I'm a Wellsway Triangle resident, and this is Monica Hiernan.
Also a Wellsway Triangle resident, and we live within 100 metres.
Yeah, and we also have Susan, who will answer. Susan Crisp, also a local resident, who will answer any questions or support with questions.
Susan, if you want, you can bring a chair forward to sit with the other two. That's fine. Thank you. Okay, I'll give you 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. The officer's report sets out the details of our objections, which we emailed in a document yesterday, which has been uploaded to the planning portal. The main paragraph, first paragraph, material considerations for refusal. The scheme does not provide the required replacement employment space or the required 50% affordable housing. The scheme offers re-provision of 43% industrial land and 35% affordable housing, as was mentioned in the officer's report. So we feel it fails on both planning policy requirements and then should be refused on that basis. Even if the council accepts the 35% affordable housing rather than the 50%, which is now required in the plan, We feel it doesn't justify the compromises made on the exemplary design and the presence of a tall building on the site. Allowing a tall building in this location changes the emerging context and sets a precedent for more tall buildings potentially, which would compromise the general character of the Camberwell skyline and the general character of the area, because it's a low skyline at the moment. It's not identified as a location for tall buildings, and we feel that's one of the most important issues and concerns we have, setting a precedent which could, well, there are the other two applications that are in also have tall buildings which are have been allowed, and they're with the GLA. I think they're being referred to the GLA, so that's what we're hoping, that there's an interrelationship between the various sites. The LDS flagged that up, and we just hope that it could be lower. Even the lower blocks in this development are still, I mean, the 13-storey is 14 metres high. The others are only just below 30, so they're taller buildings, but they're on the top range of taller buildings, and they're taller than the surrounding area. And the leap from the 8-storey to the 13 is quite a big leap in the middle of the site. One of the things we mentioned is the 87% of the bathrooms without windows. That's not exemplary. 24%, as you mentioned, 24% without windows for a single aspect and kitchens and bathrooms. The garden square is going to receive quite little light. We wonder if it can be called a garden square, if it doesn't receive, and how much amenity it will provide. And the other thing we wanted to mention was that the officer's report does recognise that St George's Church Tower is a local landmark, and tall buildings aren't required for wayfinding on this site. I think that's everything I wanted
Thank
to
you.
say, apart from the industrial space. Yeah.
That's pretty much 3 minutes. Thank you very much. That's well timed. Thank you. Any questions from the committee to the objectors? Being very quiet today, but I mean, obviously, you've heard the comments that were made by officers earlier in presenting all of this. Any further comments you wish to add, having heard the presentation, beyond the points you've already made?
This point here, you're saying it's about the site location.
The site location, that's the one I really want to say about the site. Site's not identified for tall buildings, and yet this development and two of the others that have been approved already but are referred to the GLA have allowed tall buildings in this area. That's our main concern.
Thank you. Councillor Papula.
Yep, just a quick question from me. What would be a more suitable height in the area?
We're only commenting on what we've been presented with, rather than we've never been given a sort of what would you like to happen in this area, and certainly we were never sort of originally consulted in terms of would you like to have a 13-storey tower in this area, but that's all sort of happened. So I suppose we understand there needs to be more density, and we understand there needs to be higher buildings in the area. It is noticeable that one of the schemes that is coming forward is under 30 metres on one of the sites, and the other sites, it's the emerging context and the implications of gradual heights that we will get. So it's about Burgess Park being seen as a sort of line between the inner and the sort of lower density further south. We've got, and this is all the sort of much bigger picture stuff, which has sort of been debated through the Southwark plan, and obviously you're looking at one specific planning application and having to decide it against, what's already in the Southwark plan. So, that's where we are.
Thank you. And we've obviously heard about the development of the local development scheme. Were you involved in that process?
Yes, we were involved in the consultation for it, and we did raise all the issues about the tall buildings, the taller buildings, the difference between taller and tall, and the site allocation, and we definitely had concerns about the height even then. It was very silent on heights, except for the shoulder height on Parkhouse Street, which was set at 6. No other specific heights were given, so it was quite vague.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you. I don't think we've got any further questions. So thank you very much for coming to talk to us today, and thank you for the answers. If you could return to the gallery, I will ask the applicants to come forward, or the applicant's agent. Thank you. So as I've outlined to previous speakers, you have 3 minutes. I'll allow you to introduce yourselves first, and then 3 minutes will start.
Thank you, Chair and members, for your time this evening. My name is Nick Groves. I'm the Managing Director of Peachtree Services, who represent the owners of the site. The site has been owned for many years, and should we receive consent, we are committed to building and managing the scheme as well as helping integrate it into the existing community. The current site consists of an industrial complex which contains a mix of very old, low-quality units that are inefficient beyond repair and provide a very limited number of jobs for the local area. We want to change this. This is a unique opportunity to revitalise this underused site, to create a community of much-needed new and affordable homes and help support the area as an exciting creative hub for local businesses, artists and makers, complementing the nearby consented schemes and the others due to be brought forward. This has been 6 years in the making, but all this hard work has resulted in a much better scheme. The previous appeal decision has been vital in guiding the design of a scheme which is now fully acceptable in planning terms, whilst feedback from the community, Southwark Council and the GLA has allowed us to reflect on local need. Likewise, the local development study, developed and adopted by Southwark Council, has also proven to be invaluable, providing us with an opportunity to work in collaboration with the Council and other landowners. We've worked hard to engage with the local community, including through 2 rounds of consultation where we heard from over 1,000 local residents and amenity groups. In response, we made a number of changes, including a reduction in the height of the taller building from 14 to 13 stories, and by 1 to 2 stories across the site, leading to an overall reduction of density on site by 25% compared to the appeal scheme. We also incorporated a flexible community space, which could be used for a range of community activities. We've since been delighted to receive around 50 letters of support. We believe our proposals offer the best mix of benefits for the local community, including 375 high-quality and sustainable new homes, which exceed space standards, of which 35% will be affordable. These designs are supported by officers and the DRP, and our technical assessments show that all existing residents will maintain a good level of daylight and sunlight, alongside delivering new high-quality, publicly accessible green and play space, which will increase biodiversity on site, will also be providing other green initiatives, such as the promotion of sustainable transport and PV panels to minimise carbon emissions. Beyond this, our Camberwell Social Union strategy will ensure the local community benefits directly, including through the generation of 155 jobs, 20% affordable workspace, and significant SIL and Section 106 contributions to be spent in the local area. We've listened, reflected and delivered a revised scheme which provides valuable benefits for the local community. I hope you will seize this opportunity and support your officer's recommendation for approval. We have members of the project team present this evening to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the applicants? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Residents have consistently raised concerns about the height of the central tower. I wonder how you would reflect on those concerns.
Good evening.
David Morris at DP9 Planning Consultants. Yeah, it's a fair point. It's been there all the way through the journey, and gosh, it's been a journey. And actually, you know, as Nick says, I think the scheme is genuinely better for the process that we've been through. The policy does allow for taller buildings. The site allocation says that, so you know, it's expected and in the plan. As you know, because the officers have set it out so well, this is always a constant balance of the right scheme in its context, the right land uses, of which there are pressures there, in a format that's deliverable, that's sort of meeting your priorities. We've undertaken through the earlier scheme, the appeal, the LDS work, and now this application, a very, very thorough study of the townscape, multiple views, also recognising the setting to the Metropolitan Open Land, which is Burgess Park itself. And we've come to the view, as of the council and their officers, as did the inspector, at that taller height, that it was appropriate in its setting. Now, I appreciate that's a very subjective view, and you know, my version of tall is different to others. I'm not sort of saying one is right and one is wrong, but that is a pretty thorough judgment that's been made through this very long process.
Councillor Papula.
I just wanted clarification as to whether a 13-storey building will have a disproportionate impact on the square that's in the proposal. It does seem, from a layman's point of view, it will mean that there's a lot less light in a supposed green square.
From an overshadowing perspective. Yeah. No, fair question, and we've done a number of studies. Colleagues are here from GIA if you'd like to hear a more technical answer, but those scenarios through the year have been modelled in the model at various different heights, and you know, those studies have shown that there'll be more than acceptable light levels in those open space, all of the open space and the adjacent areas.
Councillor Leeming.
The local residents mentioned that the it's 35% affordable housing as opposed to the London plan ambition of 50%, and I wonder whether what your thoughts are about the difference in that 15%. Would the scheme be viable if the so that I kind of follow-on question: would the scheme be viable with 50% affordable housing? Secondly, on the affordable housing question, there was a phrase used last week which I forget, but are they going to be the same houses as affordable as they are for sale? And third one is the residents also mentioned the lack of external windows to a significant proportion of the bathrooms, and questioning whether that's exemplary, and I'd welcome your views on that.
Thank you. If I maybe take the first two and pass over to Colin for the second. So, again, a long-standing theme throughout this site, and I'm sure you see these issues all the time, is the balance of often competing pressures. You know, we would love to put back all of the commercial space, and we'd love to give 50% affordable housing, frankly, because it would have been an easier ride, but it's not a deliverable scheme, and so. As you know, 35% is a level that's been set by the Mayor for fast track, which is to incentivise sites to come forward. As the officer's report notes, that is not in itself viable, but it's the best of a number of scenarios that were tested, and we're confident with the opportunity of the place, which is significant. You know, this could be really transformational with everything else around it in terms of creating and enhancing what's there, and frankly in terms of residential value. So we believe in the scheme commercially. But it's at 50%, as the report has demonstrated. That's one of the scenarios tested. It wouldn't be viable, and we wouldn't be giving you a commitment that we are tonight about delivery. Shall I pass over for the bathroom?
So we've worked very hard with officers over the last number of years, particularly since the appeal decision, to maximise the number of different ways that we provide exemplary accommodation. And I think, as the inspector noted in the decision, it's almost impossible to tick every box. You know, you have to kind of make decisions about what you're going to prioritise, even if there's a clear list in front of you. What we've prioritised is the size of the accommodation. So we've provided an increased, all the accommodation is oversized. We've prioritised the provision of large amenity, private amenity balconies and terraces. So where we can, we've provided 10 square metre balconies, which is way over and above NDSS and GLA, the London Plan sizes. And we've tried to keep heights of buildings generally as low as we can. As Nick noted, we've reduced the mass of the overall scheme by 25%. That's reducing the heights across the whole site down by 25%, and that's particularly around the edges. So as we meet the neighbours in Parkhouse Street and Wells Way, we've reduced heights. We've retained Building B, which is, as Vicky noted, is going to be retained as a commercial use. We've removed the extension to Building B to reduce the impact on neighbours. So we've tried to be as sensitive as we can in delivering exemplary accommodation. We've tried to maximise the number of bathrooms that receive natural light, but in all that balancing act, we've done what we can, but that's the one thing that we need. We've had to prioritise other things over. But in general terms, as is noted in the committee report, the design is exemplary.
Thank you. I'm going to I've got a number of hands up, and Councillor. All right, Councillor Leamy, if it's related to your previous.
Yeah, I remember the phrase. 10-year blind was the phrase I was looking for. Could you answer that point, please?
Apologies, we didn't. Yes, it is 10-year blind. Yes.
Well done. That was a.
And there's actually, sorry, in terms of 10-year blindness, just a point to make. Although we exceed the 20% three-bedroom accommodation across the whole development, actually within the affordable home quotient, there's 35% three-bed family accommodation. So although it looks 10-year blind, actually a lot of the family accommodation is directed at the affordable tenure, which is, I think, of great benefit.
Thank you. Councillor Whittam.
To come back on that. So yeah, the scheme is 10-year blind in terms of its design. So there's not different designs for different types of tenure. That's been in consultation with a number of operators of affordable housing. So it's been in sort of consultation with them, and that comes to more than just the design. It's how they would like to manage it, where it would be on site, etc. So that's been a genuine process, and will carry on because we haven't got a partner yet, but we're talking to a number of them. And as I understand it, the council are increasingly showing an interest in perhaps engaging and taking units as well, which is something we'd be very interested in.
Just a follow-up response actually on the taller building, if I'm allowed. The 13th floor is actually set back, it's set in from the edge of the building, and it was a conscious decision by the design team to, instead of having a lift overrun, a sort of pop-up core, if you like, at the top, we would create a single home around that lift overrun on the 13th floor, set well within the edge of the building to improve the aesthetic appearance of the building. So although strictly it's now a 13-storey building, it really is a 12-storey building with a set-back top floor that wraps around a lift core, providing a single home. So I just wanted to clarify that. And also the tall building, as compared to the appeal scheme, to your point about daylight in the square, the appeal scheme had a tall building on the corner of two shoulder blocks, if you like. So the tall building kind of extruded out of a lower rise element, which was fairly tall itself. What we've done is dislocate the tall building and have it stand alone. So it sits in space, it sits in air. So you get sunlight and daylight around the building, penetrating into the courtyard, penetrating into the square, penetrating down the garden street, way better, way more than the original appeal scheme.
Thank you. Councillor Whittam, you've been very patient. Your question.
The other phrase you can use is parity of esteem for tenure blind. I'm just interested to know how the affordable housing is distributed across the site. are specific buildings completely affordable and other ones completely market value?
So for management purposes, the social rented homes are accessed from their own front doors or entrances. The intermediate homes are provided in different buildings and are sometimes mixed in with the private accommodation. So it's a reasonably standard approach to the provision of affordable housing.
Service charges tend to be quite expensive in new blocks, making affordable housing less affordable. Have you got a strategy for that?
I mean, that is one of the main reasons for providing social rented accommodation within their own demise. So it makes service charges far less and much more manageable.
To that? Yeah, just to contextualise it, maybe. I mean, we're working within the social rent sort of financial spectrum. So these are, well, I was about to say they're slightly indicative, but they're actually very precise. But sort of to give you a flavour, a one-bedroom, two-person flat would be £125 a week kind of order. That's all inclusive. The two-bed, three-person, 140. So it's well within the HCA guidance in terms of income brackets, which, as I understand, the council has adopted as their own.
I had Councillor Roberts' note. Councillor Papula.
So what I'm kind of getting is that it may be tenure blind, but provisions will definitely be will not be equal. Is that what I'm getting from all this?
No, it's the complete opposite. Sorry, I mean there's absolutely no distinction in terms of design, aesthetic, level of amenity, communal facilities. The only distinction between the social rented element and the rest of the scheme is just that it's in its own building. So, and that's purely because of management reasons and requirements for the people that run those specific units. Nothing more than that. So, I mean, you wouldn't know anyone walking by. In fact, you know, it's perfectly feasible you'd walk into the wrong block thinking it was your apartment. So, I wouldn't want you to have the impression it's somehow different or deficient. The complete opposite.
Councillor Papula.
Just a further question with regards to the car wash. So it's noted here that the car wash will receive relocation support. Could you flesh it out for me?
Sure. I mean, as you'd imagine, we've been talking to all of the tenants for a long time. They're all on leases and agreements with the expectation that this is coming, and they're aware of the change in the area. It kind of feeds into the wider piece and the wider strategy around the Camberwell Social Union, which is this idea that we will help existing businesses that want to move on, because some of them are viable. Being honest with you, some of them just take the opportunity to have what is redundant space, and because that's useful to them. So where there's a desire and a need, we will work with those existing occupiers. And then under the Camberwell Social Union programme, which our friends at AND have sort of developed, there's a whole package in terms of new businesses, particularly sort of focused on the BAME background and startups within the borough, and other interesting ideas like a rent credit voucher for those that join the programme, with a view to delivering on a number of social impact agenda points which have all been set out in the application. So there's a whole strategy there for how the workspace will work in the existing and proposed condition.
That sounds great, especially for black and ethnic minority businesses as well. But I'm just keen on bringing you back to what specific help the car wash will get to relocate.
That depends really on what they want. I mean, that conversation starts with, well, we might just stop, through to we'd like some help to find another site. Let's take the latter as an example. Then, you know, we would work with agents to look for other locations that they might go to help them with that. We can't. That's not a commitment, an open-ended commitment to a sort of financial help to pay rent where they might go or anything. But I mean, there's Nick, you might say more now, but Nick's a good person. They've owned the site for a long time. Where we can help, we would want to, because it's facilitating the site and preparing it for this wider vision and idea. But I don't know if you want to add anything more.
Yes, no, I mean, we've obviously worked with the tenant of the car wash for a number of years, and as David says, you know, he's well aware of what the sort of longer term plans are for the site, because the nature of his tenancy is such that it's a sort of short term flexible arrangement. We would obviously be very happy to provide him with, you know, all the assistance we can give him to find alternative location, an alternative site, an alternative location somewhere within the borough. I think the existing premises that he's in, I suspect that, you know, it in itself it does suffer some sort of deficiencies and issues, so he'd be quite happy, I think, to find somewhere that was more appropriate for his particular operation.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, so I'd like to thank you for addressing us this evening. If you'd like to return to the public gallery, thank you. So next, I've not been made aware, but are there any supporters of the scheme that live within 100 metres of the site? I don't believe so. That brings us on to ward councillors. I can see a couple of ward councillors in the room. If you wish to come forward. So, just for the record, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, and then you'll have 3 minutes to address the meeting.
Well, I'm the junior. He can kick off.
He does all the talking for me. Councillor Ian Wingfield.
Councillor Jason Autry, I'm his understudy. Can we kick off? I think I'll start off by saying, do we want development in this specific area as ward councillors? Absolutely. Do residents want development in this area? Absolutely, from what we've heard. Do we welcome the fact that significant revisions have been made to this application? Absolutely. There's a new mews that will be introduced that will enlarge the distance of the scheme and the rear of the existing buildings on Parkhouse Street. We absolutely welcome that. There are a number of family-sized homes across the scheme, which we note have been increased from 60% to 65%. We absolutely welcome that. Now, what do we think due consideration ought to be given by the committee in this particular application? I think due consideration ought to be given to the height of the building, particularly in the middle. I note that because the Secretary of State, when they reviewed the application in the first instance, noted that they had considered whether it had been identified that less than substantial harm to the significance of the church at St. George's is outweighed by the public benefits of the proposal. And in accordance with Section 66 and their duty, it was attributed that considerable weight ought to be given to the harm produced by the height. So due consideration ought to be given by the committee. And I'll say no further on that. But before I bring in my ward colleague, I will mention a few things that I think ought to be considered as recommendations should you be minded to accept this application, because I would hate to miss the opportunity for the committee to consider certain things. So, for example, a condition ought to be given to mitigate for the loss of employment space, of which a contribution of, I think, circa 140,000 has been given. And I think that should be protected for the Camberwell area, which I think is in deep need for it. I think a condition needs to be set to address the points around economic growth and the protection of jobs for local people in Southwark, is the second thing. And the third thing is around the amount that's contributed in regard to the TFL, which I know is a significant amount, which is much more than it's stipulated here, was agreed during the proceedings, during the public hearing. I'll hand over to my colleague.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't want to prolong the evening, so I'll just wait for Councillor Johnson to ask me if I've got anything further to add.
Any questions from members of the committee? Well, as it was billed, Councillor Johnson.
I would hate to disappoint Councillor Wingfield. Do you have any further comments?
I'm tempted to say no, but no. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Yes, I'd just like to go into some of the background to this so that members are fully aware about the history of this application. The developers themselves indicated this has been going on for 6 years, and in its original form, which went to appeal, it certainly was too high. It certainly was too dense. It had a negative impact on the local surroundings, both the residential properties on Wells Way and Parkhouse Street, and also on the aspect to Burgess Park as well. So quite rightly, local residents and local councillors at the time opposed that application, and that's why it went to the Secretary of State, and that's why the Secretary of State turned it down. So as a consequence of that appeal, and because you've heard this evening, because of the other immediate developments, about half a dozen of them in the vicinity, residents were very concerned that they didn't want to see hiddledy-piddledy planning applications agreed, which conflicted with one another, and they wanted to have, as already been mentioned, a master plan for the area. We couldn't get one in time, so we had this local development study. And I think the local development study is quite an innovation. It's something which I think could be employed in other parts of the borough for future developments as well. So, rather than having a development that was too high, too dense, and particularly on Parkhouse Street, enveloped the existing terrace there, almost surrounding it like the Alamo, the developers have come forward with this different scheme. Yes, there are valid considerations from local residents that you've heard this evening that I think you should take on board in your deliberation tonight. The other point I'd also like to say is, yes, residents don't want to see this area neglected, left derelict to attract squatters or other forms of antisocial behaviour. Nobody's against development. It's just that they want a development which is sympathetic to the area and is not sort of overdeveloped. So I think we all recognise that we're in a situation where we do need housing in the borough as part of a central London authority, but it can't be housing at any price. It has to be something which is considered, and that's why this evening, you've heard the concerns from local residents and from my ward colleague, and we're hoping that you will take those on board and reach a sensible conclusion as always. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. The residents obviously raised the height of the block in the middle. Is there a particular height that you would have been happier with? If not 30 metres, if not 13 floors?
I think a bit rusty when it comes to planning policy, but I'll try and remember what the SPD says for the Camberwell area. When in regards to Camberwell, it says in the SPD that respect ought to be given to the low line of the Camberwell area. Now, when we look to the LDS, and that was quite a useful exercise which was done alongside developers, and the residents and other stakeholders. Whilst we note that the LDOS can't be given significant weight in this decision, it was noted, and correct me if I'm wrong, any officers, that in terms of the ideal height, and I'm paraphrasing here, it was to be around 7 to 8 in terms of what ought to be the standard for that area. Now, in this case, that hasn't been achieved, and obviously the LDS doesn't have any weight in the decision that you're making. But if I were to hypothesize in what I think a respectable height would be, it would be that 8 that has been achieved on the step down, but on the step up for the element that's in the middle, that's much higher than I would personally like. But I guess that needs to be addressed in tandem with our housing needs, right? And I guess that's a deliberation point that ought to be taken into consideration.
Thank you, that's helpful. Councillor Whittam.
In the words of some of the we all know who used to sit in that chair, the application is the application is the application. And what is before us is 13 stories. So basically, would you accept that or not?
Well, I do recall being in front of this committee on a previous occasion where the Liberal Democrat member for Surrey Docks Ward asked me that similar type question, and my response was, well, I'm not the one who's sitting in the chair to make the decision, and I wouldn't want to sort of preempt your conclusion in that regard. I mean, our role here this evening is to support the voice you've heard from our residents in terms of their concerns, and to put it in the broader picture in terms of the impact locally. Obviously, coming back to the housing question, there's a dire need for housing in the borough, and we're all growing up about that, and everybody recognises that. And we live in a system that, without a central government that's prepared to fund a national building programme to get sufficient social housing built in this country, we're faced with having to negotiate with private developers in order to get affordable and social housing. It's not something I would choose, and I'm sure it's not something a lot of us here would choose as our first political priority, but that's the reality. And the reality with private developers is they have shareholders, and they have to be accountable to their shareholders, and they have to make profit. Obviously, they're not going to minimise or down that profit as much as they can or they ought, and that's the reality of the system that we live in. But I come back to the point that I made before. Yes, let there be development, but let there be development that is sympathetic to the area, that isn't too high or too dense, and it's something that can marry and fit in with the rest of the area. Councillor Leeming.
Thank you. Just thinking about the phrase you just used there, Councillor Whitfield, of sympathetic to the area. I mean, about quarter to half mile south of this area, we have Crane House, which, from memory, having been on the top floor, late council delivering leaflets to the Labour Party, is at 13 stories at least. Just on the north side of Peckham Road, we have Lerkenell House, which may be a bad example at the moment, given its issues, but again is of a similar height. I mean, do you think those buildings are too tall, and do you think they have they're in your ward and have been there many decades? Do you think that changes the equation at all?
Well, fortunately, I wasn't a member of the council at the time when they were given planning permission, but they are products of their time. You're talking about post-war housing. There was a need to build as many social homes as possible, and that was the panacea to build high into the sky. Whether it worked or not, I think we've all got our conclusions on that. The modern reality is that we're faced with that same dilemma now. Because the price of land is so great in London that you can't build across. You've either got to build up or down, literally. That's what it amounts to. So I'm not a developer, and I've no desire to become a developer, and that's something that they have to work out themselves. But I'm just laying out the facts for you, as I'm sure you're all fully aware, and that's the modern dilemma we face.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, so thank you very much for addressing us. Councillor Chair, are you indicating you wish to say something further?
Yes, if possible. Not sure if that's allowed without a question.
I will indulge you as long as it is brief.
Yeah, no, there are obviously there's an opportunity here to add conditions, right? And I would just urge the committee to give proper thought to the conditions that are made, because they can have significant impacts on the local area. And I talk about the economic benefits, particularly where we mentioned the need to have, businesses that support small, medium enterprises that we seek to support across the borough. And I think we should make that a specific intent of ours to ensure that those are Southwark-led, and the jobs, that a portion of it is Southwark. It's people who are from Southwark, because it's very often gets missed in this forum, and we have developments that go through, and when we go to the shops and we see the people serving us and the people working there and the people who own the businesses, they don't often reflect the nature of our borough. So I'd just like that to be considered, should you be minded to accept the application.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to ask you to return to the public gallery. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
That brings us to any further questions that committee members might have for officers. Councillor Whittam.
Just thinking about the possible conditions. I'm not sure we can ring fence payments for business space loss to Camberwell, can we?
Sorry. Yes, I mean, if you were to ask us to do that, we could prioritise that, and that could be the first call. I mean, if we couldn't find somewhere to do that, then there would probably be a default to spending it more widely. But we could prioritise that as a first call. Kath, if that would be helpful.
Councillor Papula.
Yep. Is there some way, Chair, to formalise the 3 recommendations noted down by the ward councillors to be put forward? What's the process in terms of that?
Okay, so we had the one about the use of the employment offset fund, which Colin has just talked about. I think the other one was about, was it local employment on site? And the final one was the issue about TfL payments. I think on TfL, would obviously, I think I might speak for the whole committee, and if anybody disagrees on the committee, please let me know. But I think the approach we'd probably like to take is similar to the one that we've taken at the Old Kent Road, given the bus consultation, and say that where we are taking contributions for TfL, that we need to see additionality on top of the services we have at the moment. So this shouldn't be used as a way of massaging things through the proposed bus cuts. The committee happy with we take that approach, and I can see officers nodding. Thank you. And so that the final point is about what we might be able to do about local employment on site.
Yep, there's some information in the officer report in relation to affordable workspace, and it sets out a number of criteria that it has to meet. And one of those is prioritising affordable workspace for existing small and independent businesses. Where it is not feasible, it must be targeted for small and independent businesses from the local area within an identified need. So we could be specific in the Section 106 agreement that we are talking about the local area, and then more broadly within the borough. That's set out at paragraph 105. I mean, we could take that approach sort of more generally across a number of the employment provisions. We've got provisions in there for employment during construction and employment in the completed development. So if that's the, if that's something the committee wants us to do, that's something that we could feed into the 106.
Councillor Papula?
Yep, I just note that on 105, of course, it notes local area, but I think what was noted down by the ward councillors was that they wanted it specifically in the Camberwell area. They wanted it was quite explicit in that sense. So could that possibly be done?
Chair, we could, in the 106, do a hierarchy. So basically use it in the ward area first, and then from there to the slightly wider area. So ward area as a priority, and then the rest of the borough. I think that's what Colin suggested earlier. So I'm happy to feed that through to the legal officer.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Are committee content with those proposals? Any further comments or questions that any member of the committee wishes to make? Councillor Papula, I can see you itching.
Yeah, it's just a very general statement of I feel very conflicted in terms of this proposal, both in terms of its height, that was noted down by both the ward councillors and the residents. I'm also quite conflicted in terms of the massive loss of affordable workspace, and also I personally feel I know that it's policy compliant, but just the sheer personal lack of affordable homes on the site as well. I would have loved if it was a bit more ambitious in that sense. So yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Whittam.
Having been on the committee that refused the original application, and we agonised over that, but this is a much better scheme than that. It feels more in context. The size of it seems much more appropriate for the location. So I will be supporting this application.
Thank you. Councillor Leeming.
I mean, I can understand the residents' concern about the height of the tower, and I mentioned Crane House because I live not far from Crane House, and one of the reasons that I was able to buy my house was when I remember going around it, and the person selling it said, well, we've struggled to sell our house because of the tower block nearby, and it's never been an issue for me, but obviously everybody has different points of view on it, so I can understand why the residents are concerned about it, and it will change the nature of the area. On the other hand, I think as the Ward Council has put it, we have a tension here between the need to address the housing crisis. We have a tension in that we don't have the powers that we would like to build the houses we would like to build as an authority, so we have to deal with the reality that's presented to us, and it does feel, as Councillor Woodham has just said, that this is, as good as we're going to get in this location. So I will be supporting it, and also supporting the conditions that have been suggested by the local ward councillors.
Thank you. Any further comments? In that case, I think what I'm going to do is move us towards taking a decision on this. I would like to propose that we adopt the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraphs 1 to 4 of the report on pages 403 and 404 of the main agenda pack. Namely that firstly, planning permission is granted subject to conditions as amended by the addendum report and taking on board the comments regarding those 3 issues raised by the ward councillors. The applicant enters into an appropriate legal agreement and referral to the Mayor of London. Secondly, the environmental information be taken into account as required by Regulation 26 of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessments Regulations 2017 as amended. 3, that following the issuing of the permission, the Director of Planning and Growth places a statement on the statutory register pursuant of Regulation 30 of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impacts Assessments Regulations 2017 as amended, and that for the purposes of Regulation 31D, the main reasons and considerations on which the Planning Committee's decision is based shall be set out as in this report and shall inform the Secretary of State of the decision. And finally, that in the event that the requirements of paragraph 1 are not met by the 30th of September 2022, the Director of Planning and Growth be authorised to refuse planning permission, if appropriate, for the reasons set out in paragraph 499 of this report. Do I see anybody that's willing to second that? I see Councillor Whittam. In that case, can I move us to a vote, please? So, first of all, Councillor Whittam.
For, Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
I've changed my mind literally 5 times on this. I counted it up. On balance, against.
Thank you. Councillor Leeming.
For, Chair.
Councillor Papula.
Abstain, Chair.
Councillor Roberts.
For, Chair.
And I'm Councillor Richard Livingstone and I'm voting for the motion. Thank you. So that is carried and the application is granted. I'm going to have I've had a call for a comfort break for 5 minutes, so if people could return by 8:38, please. We were getting a running report. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Apologies for slight late recommencement of the proceedings. With that, I think we're going to move straight to item 8.1. I've got Gemma Usher and Patrick Cronin. I'm not sure who's leading off on this one.
Good evening, Chair, members and those joining the meeting in person and remotely. The next development management items to be considered are 21/AP/3775 and 21/AP/4712. These are reserved matters applications, each relating to a zone within the Canada Water Master Plan area. Before these two reserved matters applications are presented to members for their consideration, I will start with some of the background to the Canada Water Master Plan. Outline planning permission was granted in 2020 for the Canada Water Master Plan redevelopment by British Land. As approved, the master plan contains 14 parcels for redevelopment. These are known as zones and are named alphabetically from Zone A through to Zone N. This slide shows the master plan boundary. This slide shows the master plan boundary highlighted, and within that, zones F and L. Reserve Matters Application 21/AP/3775 relates to Zone L. Here you can see it located on the northern periphery of the Canada Water Master Plan. It has a long frontage onto Quebec Way. Within its boundary falls part of the Printworks building, some smaller ancillary buildings, and part of the Printworks loading yard. Reserve Matters Application 21/AP/4712 relates to Zone F, which occupies a central location within the master plan area. It fronts Surrey Quays Road and covers a portion of the Surrey Quays Leisure Park, including parts of the existing Odeon Cinema, the security hut for Printworks, and areas of hard standing. This image shows the various phases of the wider master plan area as approved in 2020. The master plan aims to create a major new town centre comprising a diverse mix of retail, residential, office, leisure and cultural facilities. Construction is underway on plots A1, A2 and K1, which were approved in detail as part of the outline permission. A range of enabling works are also being undertaken on Zone H. Reserve Matters applications have been granted for the Dock, Printworks Street and plot H1. The next two Reserve Matters applications British Land wish to bring forward are Zone F and Zone L. As proposed by these two Reserve Matters applications, both zones would comprise a mix of residential and commercial land uses. Zone L includes 77% affordable housing, of which the tenure split would be 64% social rent and 13% intermediate. The outline planning permission was granted subject to various parameter plans, which established the maximum parameters within which future buildings and spaces can come forward, such as the maximum building height, minimum and maximum building footprints, basement extents, and permitted uses for each master plan zone. These parameters are contained in the development specification and parameter plans, which were approved as part of the overall permission. In addition, the design code documents set out the detailed design principles against which any subsequent Reserve Matters application should be assessed. As shown on this slide, the OPP defines a range of potential uses and maximum floor space caps, which can be delivered within each zone, as well as an overall cap for the master plan site. The development specification allows up to 38,500 square metres of workspace, 3,700 square metres of retail floor space, and 57,700 square metres of residential floor space within Zone F. The parameter plans identify Zone F as being an appropriate location for two tall buildings up to 125 metres AOD and 116 metres AOD. With respect to Zone L, the development specification allows up to 11,500 square metres of workspace, 800 square metres of retail, 4,000 square metres of community facilities, and 27,600 square metres of residential floor space. It also allows for up to 3,000 square metres for a substation. the parameter plans cap Zone L's height at 33 metres AOD, save for two portions set slightly higher at 37 metres AOD. So now looking specifically at the Zone L Reserve Matters application, the applicant proposes the construction of 3 residential-led buildings with flexible commercial community uses at ground floor level, along with associated facilities. The 3 proposed buildings would be complemented by new public realm and landscaping. I would just draw members' attention to the addendum at this point. For Zone L, there are a small number of very minor corrections and clarifications to the committee report published on the Council's website and shared with members on July 19th. With respect to the draft conditions, one of the previously recommended draft conditions is not actually required because a condition to the same effect is attached to the OPP. 2 conditions require very minor rewording, and 1 additional noise-related condition is proposed. The addendum also notes the summary of the Zone L proposal prepared by the applicant and circulated to members on July 22nd. Having taken into account the additional information, following consideration of the issues raised, the recommendation remains the same as given in the committee report. So, looking a little more closely at Zone L's location, it is bounded to the northeast by the public highway of Quebec Way, beyond which are the residential developments of Claremont House and the series of buildings that make up the Quebec Quarter. The wider surrounding area to the north, which is of a predominantly residential character, includes Alfred Salter Primary School and LDDC housing. To the northwest, Zone L is bounded by the former Mulberry Business Park, which is currently undergoing redevelopment for the SCAPE student housing scheme. To the south are the commercial buildings and areas of hard standing at the Printworks and Surrey Quays Leisure Park. Here are some photographs of the site. In terms of the policy and designations context, the site is subject to the Canada Water site allocation in the Southwark plan. It's also in an opportunity area and a major town centre. The site is not within a conservation area or one of the London or Borough View corridors. There are no listed buildings on or close by to the site. The scheme would deliver 237 new homes in a range of flat, masonette and townhouse formats.
We need to ensure that all committee members hear all the evidence, so we're going to have to break very briefly. Hopefully that emergency call is very brief. Okay, are you all right to? I'm all right. She's talking to her mother. Fine. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. I hope she's fine. Anyway, Patrick, if you want to recommend.
Great, thank you. So the scheme would deliver 237 new homes in a range of flat, masonette and townhouse formats, with dwelling sizes ranging from 1 beds to 5 beds. 6 small commercial community units are proposed, totalling 414 square metres. An above-ground substation compound of 92 square metres is also proposed. These types and quanta of land use accord with the OPP development specification. 2 of the buildings would stand to 9 stories at their maximum point, which at less than the 37-metre AOD cap in the parameter plans would be compliant. Further details are given in these tables about the materiality of the buildings and the public realm offer. Here you can see the proposed arrangement of buildings on site. The 3 buildings are named Block L1, Block L2 and Block L3, and they would frame a group of new courtyards, public squares and routes. The small white cube visible between block L2 and block L3 on this diagram is the substation. As touched on earlier, the proposed land uses at ground level and from first floor upwards comply with the development specification and parameter plans. One key element of the parameter plans is that Zone L's Quebec Way frontage should be predominantly residential, which the Reserved Matters proposal has achieved. Looking specifically at the proposed housing, and within that the tenure mix, the 237 dwellings would be split into 63 open market, 137 social rent, and 37 intermediate homes. The 174 affordable dwellings equate to 76.6% of the total when measured in habitable rooms. The affordable tenures would be provided in blocks L1 and L2, with the open market units in L3. The OPP requires a minimum of 35% of the total habitable rooms across the entire master plan area, with a minimum to be 25% social rented and 10% to be intermediate. Individual development zones are permitted to deliver more or less than 35% of the habitable rooms as affordable, but as stipulated in the OPP Section 106 agreement, with every tranche of 500 homes constructed, at least 35% of that running total must be affordable in the 25-to-10 ratio of social rent to intermediate. And that's what this table explains. So Zone L is expected to be the third development zone to come forward in the master plan. The number of homes it would deliver, added to the two earlier zones, brings the total above the 500 dwelling milestone, which means at this stage in the delivery of the master plan, at least 35% of the housing must be affordable, which, as you can see, would be met, the proportion being considerably above the minimum at 53.7%. Also included in the table are zones F and G. This is to help you understand how, at the 1,000 home milestone, the master plan would uphold the minimum 35% affordable requirement. Moving beyond tenure and looking at the distribution of the proposed Zone L dwellings by size, the scheme would be compliant. No more than 10% of the residential units would be studio flats. A minimum of 60% would have 2 or more bedrooms. A minimum of 20% would have 3, 4 or 5 bedrooms. And it should also be noted that of the larger family dwellings within the development, 88% would be in affordable tenures. This is welcomed as it responds positively to specific local affordable housing demand. Here is the ground plane, where there would be a mix of homes, ancillary residential facilities, and flexible commercial community units, the latter denoted by the peach and blue colours. As you move to the upper floors, everything is residential. As this plan shows, at block L1, there is a wing that is relatively low rise. It's depicted here with the green roof towards the bottom of the diagram, and that is a row of 6 townhouses. As you move to the top of the buildings, and as this slide shows, a portion of block L1 and block L2 stands 1 story taller than block L3. Also relevant is the stretch of land abutting blocks L1 and L2 along their southwestern edge, and which bisects Zone L in between block L2 and block L3. This is to be transformed into a new pedestrian-friendly one-way road named Real Street. The detailed design of Real Street is the subject of a separate RMA currently being assessed by the LPA. The design has been fully coordinated with that of the Zone L RMA to create a successful and seamless relationship. Here are some examples of the different dwelling formats, and here you can see some dwelling layouts. The homes would benefit from a good quality of outlook, with a majority enjoying corner, dual or multiple aspect. Here are a few more. Overall, the quality of accommodation is very good. In addition to the residential use, Zone L also includes flexible commercial community floor space. The 6 units would be distributed across the 3 blocks, many opening onto public space, thus helping to bring ground level activation and animation. Now turning to the design of the proposal. Block L1 and L2 would be 9 stories at their maximum, but 8 stories along Quebec Way, with the 8th story setback to create a shoulder line. The relationship this creates to the existing apartment blocks opposite can be appreciated by referring to section BB. Block L3, as can be appreciated from section AA, would stand to a maximum of 8 stories. All parts of the Zone L proposal are within the height limitations established and deemed acceptable as part of the outline planning permission. As these elevations show, the blocks are intended to read as a family, but with their coloration distinguishing them. L1 would be finished in red tones, L2 in light grey, and L3 in a darker grey. The above-ground compound for helping to ventilate the consented below-ground substation would be located on the southern corner of the public square. These images give a sense of its scale and materiality. A series of new landscape spaces are proposed, the majority to be publicly accessible. Many of the spaces would be densely planted, accommodate incidental and dedicated play facilities, and be framed by active frontages. This Reserve Matters application proposes to retain 8 of the existing on-site trees, 2 more than anticipated when outline permission was granted, which is welcomed. A UGF of 0.37 would be achieved. Here are some examples of the proposed play facilities and where they would be located across Zone L. 9 public representations were received, 8 in objection and 1 neutral. The issues raised most commonly were: buildings would be of an excessive height or scale, buildings would be harmful to or not in keeping with the local character, loss of light for neighbours, loss of privacy for neighbours, and the proposed loss of trees is unacceptable and or the replacement tree planting is inadequate. While the neighbour objections are noted, all 3 proposed buildings would be within the height limitations established by the parameter plans as approved as part of the OPP, and the scale, modulation and detailed design of the 3 blocks would achieve a high quality of design and an appropriate contextual response. With respect to neighbour concerns about amenity impacts, similarly, the maximum envelope consented by the OPP assessed these impacts and deemed them to be acceptable. The RMA proposal is within the maximum envelope, and thus there would be no additional impacts beyond those previously deemed acceptable, and there has been no change to the baseline conditions in the interim. Regarding the concern about the loss of trees, this was examined as part of the OPP, and it was concluded that up to 16 may need to be removed to bring forward a viable and optimal redevelopment of the site. This RMA proposes to retain 2 more trees than anticipated by the OPP, so that's 8 as opposed to 6, which should be welcomed. In conclusion, for the reasons set out in the report and discussed in this presentation, this proposal is considered to be a positive form of development for the borough. The proposal accords with the OPP and relevant development plan policies in respect of land use, quantum of development and residential design standards. An EIA statement of conformity has been provided to demonstrate that the assumptions, conclusions and mitigations secured at outline stage are still fit for purpose and that this RMA would not give rise to new significant effects. The development would deliver a significant number of new homes, the majority in affordable tenures and a number of larger family homes. The proposed community commercial floor space would bring positive economic benefits and help activate the various new high-quality public spaces. The buildings are of a neighbourly scale, and the amenity of nearby residential occupiers would be protected. As such, the recommendation is for approval, subject to additional conditions. Thank you.
Yes, and somebody help with the lights, so we're not meeting in the dark. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Any questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Patrick. Just a quick question to clarify. Resident concerns that the height of L2 exceeds what had originally been granted in the hybrid application. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the difference between what the parameters were in the hybrid application and what we are looking at tonight.
Yes, so I actually spoke to this member of public directly about this. It was a little bit of confusion around what the height of L2 was with respect to the OPP. So just to be clear, the height of both L1 and L2 are the same, and both of their heights are less than the maximum envelope permitted by the OPP. This particular member of the public was trying to read the drawings, misunderstood them a little, made the comment, also got in touch with me directly, and I explained that. But I believe in that particular instance, that member of the public was satisfied with my response and now understands that there isn't a breach of the envelope. Thanks.
Councillor Whittam.
I note that the urban greening factor is less than 0.4, which is what is in the London plan. Why are we accepting that?
So firstly, the OPP, which secures all of the various expected mitigation for the scheme, was permitted before the introduction, or the adoption rather, of the London Plan policies regarding the UGF. However, the developer does recognise that as a good developer, they would like to ensure that they are maximising greening across the site, and so they are committed to site-wide achieving the requisite, or the UGF, the minimum UGF score required by the London Plan. The difficulties presented by the way the master plan is disaggregated into plots means that individually it can be quite difficult for the zones themselves, without having regard or factoring in adjacent public realm, to meet those UGF scores. So if I just go back a few slides to where this is discussed, the developer has a vision to ensure that the requisite score across the master plan is delivered, but what they will need to do in order to deliver that is to rely on adjacent public realm. It has been agreed between officers and developer, even though it's not required by the OPP, that they will be doing that. And so while this site, because of the way the red line is drawn very tightly around the plot, won't achieve it, the developer has provided us with this outline information here to suggest that the Printworks quarter as a whole, so that's plot A, Zone H, part of Zone J, and Zone L, will be able to deliver that once all the adjacent public realm is also factored into that calculation. So yes, we're accepting 0.37, which is, yes, below the policy expectation, but when it's seen in the round, together with the adjacent plots and the UGFs that they will achieve master plan wide, the policy will be met.
Mr. Whittam.
I just hope we're not double counting or counting the same bit of green land for each plot.
No, there won't be any double counting. Each plot is an isolated area of land. There is no overlapping of each of the various zones, and therefore there wouldn't be any scope for double counting. You can be sure there'll be a robust assessment of that to ensure that there is no risk of double counting.
Could I ask maybe that, maybe outside of this application, that officers could provide that for committee members to see how that breaks down across the whole master plan area? Because I think that feels like an area that people need a bit of reassurance on. Councillor Roberts, did you have your hand up? No. Councillor Fahula?
Yeah, it's just a quick one. It's noted on 353 that you've noted that a two-part condition will be imposed to ensure that a UGF of 0.37 will be achieved. Could you just flesh out what those two conditions are?
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor. So at the end of the officer report in your pack, there is a draft recommendation which includes the urban greening factor conditions. So that's condition 6. A little bit difficult to explain exactly where it is, but towards the end of the pack, after the committee report, there is this recommendation, and on page 18 of that, there's condition 6, essentially what it requires is that before the scheme is occupied, the applicant needs to provide us with what we call a post-completion urban greening factor report. That's assessed by officers together with the urban forester, and that explicitly refers to the need for the minimum score of 0.37 to be achieved on this plot. So that is a condition of consent, and it needs to be complied with before any residents move into the block.
Councillor Whittam.
Just trying to find the site numbers first. Yeah. On zone L, the community facilities have got 4,000 square metres. You keep saying community something. What was the phrase?
Commercial community units.
How do we know what they're going to be?
So the developer wishes to retain flexibility at this stage in the delivery of the master plan as to the specific end uses of each of these units. So there is no guarantee as to the nature of the final occupier of the 6 units at Plot L at this point in time. But obviously there are expectations in the development specification here as to the overall quanta of commercial space and the overall quanta of community space that should be provided master plan wide. It's a little bit it's rather early stage for the developer to be able to commit to precisely whether it would be a retail tenant, an office tenant, or a community tenant at this point in time.
Is there a minimum space for community over the whole?
So there is a minimum requirement in terms of community space in the Section 106. I don't have the exact figure to hand. Gemma might be able to find it if you're especially interested. Yeah, but there's a minimum as well as a maximum.
Thank you. Any further questions? I just wanted to ask something, and I think I get it from the drawings we've been presented, but we asked a question earlier about parity of, about places being tenured blind and parity of esteem. Now, I'm assuming that most of the buildings seem to have external walkways, which I think probably helps manage that well, but we are going to avoid having nice private blocks with lovely plush carpet on the in front of people's flats and scruffy lino in front of the social housing. To think of some examples around the borough.
I mean, just to confirm, yeah, I mean, across all 3 blocks, it would be imperceptible what tenure each block would be. In terms of detail of design and materiality, there would be consistency of quality. So here I've got some examples of the housing at Block L1. As you can see, you've got the same level of kind of reveals to the windows. The parapets are terminated crisply. You have appropriate finishing materials in the form of the decks and the balcony balustrades, and you can compare these in this image here. L3 is on the left of that top elevation, L2 is in the middle, and L1 is on the right, and they are obviously very clearly a family with extremely similar detailing finishes. It would not be possible at ground level for any passerby or any resident to distinguish which is the open market block from which are the affordable blocks.
Councillor Papula.
Just kind of jumping on that train in terms of a tenure blind look. Of course, there should be parity of provisions as well. I just wanted clarification if that's secured in the 106 as well, to ensure that it's there for the long term rather than a very short term commitment which may be lapsed by the developer.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the quality of design, that will be secured through details which are required by condition. So there is a condition on the OPP that requires that every plot, every zone that's brought forward must, prior to implementation, prior to above ground works, there should be a condition that sets out all the details. Once those are approved, that's then secured. The scheme needs to be built out to look as presented in those details. And what we're seeing in these RMA submissions is a relatively high level of detail, and the condition applications that come forward at a later time will be expected to correspond with that. So yes, they are secured in the conditions, and those are conditions on the OPP, the parent consent. So there is no risk of, in some way, over time, that being lost. It's secured.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Patrick, it seems a while ago since the outline planning application was agreed, and one of the challenges when looking at developments on a piecemeal basis is it's harder to see how, as the hybrid firms up, the plan actually evolves and changes direction. I recall at the time there was considerable debate about the balance between office space and residential space and commercial space, with British Land understandably saying, we don't know yet, it's a long time and the economy may change. Do we have any sense, I'll ask this question to British Land as well, but do we have any sense of what direction of travel the overall master plan is having between office space, commercial space of other forms, and residential?
To be honest, I can only really talk about the applications that we have at RMA stage at the current time, and as Gemma is going to present in a little while, the Zone F scheme does have a high proportion of office floor space within it. Obviously, L is residential led, and the previous blocks are residential led as well. So in terms of the applications we're seeing coming forward, I suppose you could say they are perhaps a little bit more strongly weighted in favour of the residential. In terms of British Land's kind of vision, of course it must be within the development specs, so there is a requirement in terms of minimum floor space, but you might want to put the question to British Land as to how they see at this point in time the master plan playing out in terms of the likely land uses.
I can supplement that and just also answer the question around the community floor space. So when we granted the outline planning permission, we attached a condition which set out minimum requirements to come forward in the delivery. So there was a minimum requirement for 2,000 dwellings to come forward. What we've seen in the reserved matters so far, we're only just starting to see the reserved matters, but we're already well on track for achieving that. I think we're around 1,000 dwellings from what we've seen at the moment. And then we also set minimum quantums for retail and workspace to come forward, and 500 square metres of community use. So we could end up getting significantly more community space when you go back to their proposals of where it could be delivered. But as a minimum, we know that we'll get 500 square metres. So I think, yes, BL could certainly give you a bit more detail, but that should give you some comfort that we are on track for getting what we thought we'd get at outline stage.
Councillor Roberts.
Thanks, Chair. I was just interested more in a kind of a general point about how all of these homes, what impact those homes are going to have on the transport infrastructure that is obviously currently undergoing some changes, but we've got problems at Canada's Water with capacity, and I just wondered where you've gone with those discussions.
Just stepping back to 2020, the outline planning permission dealt with the potential infrastructural demands that would come from the delivery of the Canada Water Master Plan area, and obviously assess that on the worst case scenario. So looking at those the development specifications that I had on the screen a little while ago, where we were looking at maximum quanta that could be delivered in terms of office floor space, residential floor space, and various other land uses. And obviously those the different kind of infrastructural impacts that the maximum quanta may have on, for instance, transport, schools, whatever it might be. All of that was assessed as part of that OPP application, and again, it was assessed on that worst case scenario. And where mitigation was needed, it was secured in that OPP through the Section 106 agreement. So actually, when it comes to the RMA stage, we are looking much more at those 5 reserved matters. So scale, layout, appearance, landscaping, and the 5th one I'm forgetting momentarily, but it's quite limited to those 5 considerations, and all of your concerns, and rightfully you have those concerns, were dealt with as part of that OPP, and that mitigation is there in the Section 106 agreement.
Councillor Whittam.
Just looking at page 21 in the members' pack, the wheelchair parking, that all seems to be on Printworks Street. Is that correct? Because if you live in L3, it's a hell of a walk after you've parked your mobility.
So this is probably not the best slide for showing that, because actually the wheelchair parking, and I think it is in the report, is actually so the wheelchair parking that will serve Zone L is actually within the red line boundary of Zone L. So what you're seeing on there on Printworks Street is illustrative. It falls outside the red line boundary of Zone L. There are 8 wheelchair parking spaces. You can see them on this slide. They're shown in grey, so they're generally clustered around what I'm going to say so broadly here, the southern side of L1, so the bottom of L1, and the western side of L3, so the kind of left-hand side of L3 there. And officers consider that these are reasonably distributed across the site, so that whichever block you lived in, you wouldn't have an excessively long journey to get from a wheelchair parking bay to your home if you were a wheelchair user.
Okay, I think that brings our questions to officers to an end. I'm going to move on. We haven't been notified of any objectors, but are there any objectors in the room that wish to address the committee? No? In that case, we'll move on to the applicants and the applicants' agents. If you'd like to come forward to the table at the front. Thank you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself to the committee, and then I will give you each give you 3 minutes between you to address us. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. My name is James Turley. I'm the Development Lead for British Land.
Good evening all. Natalie Render, Associate Director at DP9, Planning Consultant to British Land.
Good evening. As I say, I'm James Turley, and I'm the British Land Development Lead for Zone L. So Zone L, sort of coupled with Zone F, which is next on the agenda this evening, are intrinsically linked, and together will deliver sort of 647 new homes, 174 of which will be affordable. Alongside the Printworks application, which this committee approved 2 weeks ago, Zones F and L will complete the northeastern edge of the Canada Water Master Plan, linking Canada Water Dock with Plot K1 at Roberts Close. So Zone L itself has an important role to play in the master plan, acting as a transition from the commercial uses of the town centre to the more residential neighbourhood around Rocher, Dock, Woodland and Alfred Salter School. The choice of architect for this scheme was therefore particularly important, and as such we engaged Hayworth Tompkins, an award-winning practice with a particular emphasis on sort of private and affordable housing. Over the past 2 years during COVID, we worked hard with your sort of planning and design officers to design 3 high-quality buildings which respond to the local context. Our brief to Hayworth Tompkins was to deliver a series of high-quality, sustainable and energy-efficient buildings comprising well-designed, safe and tenure-blind homes. We think they've more than achieved that aim. We've also held sort of discussions with the council's housing team, and we hope, like with Plot K1, the council will sort of acquire the affordable homes within Zone L. We are now at a stage where planning permission is required for these discussions to advance any further. In summary, the proposals you have in front of you have a number of benefits, as well outlined by Patrick and team. Firstly, they will deliver sort of 237 high-quality, well-designed homes, 137 of which will be new council homes. Secondly, 20% of those homes will have 3 or more bedrooms, providing much-needed larger family homes, 88% of which will be affordable within the affordable tenure mix. Third, sort of 35% of the site is given over to new sort of public realm and play space, with 25 new trees proposed. The public realm has been designed to be high quality whilst remaining low maintenance and climate resistant. Finally, the proposals will be sort of highly sustainable and energy efficient. It's an all-electric development, fossil fuel free, and with a 63% saving against Part L. For all of these reasons, we respectfully ask that tonight the committee grants planning permission so we can continue our good progress on the master plan and enable us to continue delivering affordable homes for Southwark. Should you have any questions, we'd be pleased to answer them.
Thank you. 5 seconds to spare, so well done. Any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Really just a follow-up to the question that I asked of Patrick and Gemma. I don't know if you'll be best placed to answer this, as it's broader than this particular application, or whether it might be Miles. Just a general point that when looking at applications in a piecemeal way, it's often hard to get a sense of where the overall direction of travel is. Obviously, the world is completely different to the way it was when this application was originally granted. It will be helpful to get an update on where you see the master plan going. Is it going to be largely office-led? Is it going to be largely residential-led? Do you just not know?
I shall certainly give it a go. I mean, it is obviously a question that is wider than Zone L, but the outline sort of planning permission sort of permits or sort of sets out a sort of set of parameters, sort of maximum and minimum parameters, which we sort of intend to sort of work within. At this point in time, we're still working down a sort of a mixed use route, which is sort of predominantly sort of 50-50 between sort of commercial and residential. We don't see any particular need to change that at this point in time. Obviously, it's an evolving sort of beast, and something we'll keep monitoring. Yeah, we don't see any immediate need to change the proposals that are being sort of taken forward at the moment.
I'm not seeing any other questions. In that case, thank you very much. You may return to the gallery. Do we have anybody in the audience that wishes to speak in support of the scheme who lives within 100 metres of a development? I don't believe we do. And we don't have any ward councillors other than the ones that are sat on the committee who can't speak in that capacity as ward councillors. So I think it brings us forward to any further questions that members have for officers on this application. No? Any statements anybody wants to make in conclusion? In that case, what I will do is I will move us forward to the motion before us. So I'm going to propose that we adopt the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraph 1 of the report on pages 51 and 52 of the main agenda pack, that all reserved matters on access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale relating to development zone L of hybrid planning permission 18 AP 1604 be approved subject to conditions as amended by the addendum report, and that it should be noted that this reserve matters application is bound by the Section 106 legal agreement and conditions attached to the to the outline planning permission 18/AP/1604, and that environmental information must be taken into account as required by Regulation 26(1) of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017 as amendment. Does any member wish to second this recommendation? I saw Councillor Johnson first, as it's his ward. I saw two hands go up, but I'll give you the honour. Thank you. In that case, can we move to voting on this item? Councillor Whittam.
For, Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
For, Chair.
Councillor Leeming.
For, Chair.
Councillor Papula.
For, Chair.
Councillor Roberts.
For, Chair.
And I'm Councillor Livingstone, and I'm voting in for this proposal as well, which means that the motion is carried and the application is granted. Thank you. That brings us neatly on to item 8.2, which is Zone F. And I believe, Gemma, you're going to be presenting on this.
Sorry, we're there.
We can stop talking about the football and get back to the items. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. So the application I'm going to be presenting specifically relates to Development Zone F. Just check that it's working. Yep. So the development of Zone F comprises a mixed-use commercial and residential development, delivering circa 40,000 square metres of commercial floor space and 410 residential units. This reserved matters application is submitted pursuant to the outline permission granted in 2020 for the Canada Water Master Plan redevelopment by British Land. I do not intend to cover the outline planning permission in too much detail given the previous presentation, so I'll focus specifically on Plot F. The proposed works include construction of building F1, which is a 37-storey residential tower with a 5-storey nib building, providing additional residential accommodation. Construction of building F2, which consists of an office podium building up to 10 storeys in height, with a 34-storey residential tower above. All of the proposed residential homes are market units. The required associated affordable housing is being provided elsewhere within the master plan site, as allowed for under the outline planning permission and as set out in detail in the previous presentation. The ground floor of both buildings would accommodate entrance lobbies and a series of flexible retail or workspace units. A public route would be provided through the site separating F1 and F2. This route is known as the higher cut. Both blocks would have a shared basement facility, which means that they can be serviced from a single point of access on Surrey Quays Road. I would draw your attention to the addendum which has been circulated to members. The addendum confirms the potential seal payment and minor amendments to the report and to recommended conditions, with the most significant addition being a condition in respect of landscaping for the higher cut. The applicant has also submitted a briefing note to members which has been circulated. This slide shows the wider master plan boundary and the location of Zone F. The purpose of this slide is to show the identified zones across the master plan and the location for tall buildings as approved at outline stage. You'll see that 2 tall buildings were approved for this zone. Zone F is located within the centre of the master plan across a portion of the Surrey Quays Leisure Park, which includes the existing Odeon cinema, the entrance security hut for the existing Printworks site, and a hard standing area to the north of the Pizza Hut building. The demolition of all of these buildings was approved under the outline planning permission. This proposal would result in the loss of the existing cinema. However, the outline planning permission Section 106 agreement contains an obligation that the cinema be re-provided. The obligation requires the developer to use all reasonable endeavours to secure a future cinema operator for a new premises before they demolish the existing Odeon. They are required to submit evidence of marketing and negotiations to the council for scrutiny as part of this process. The obligation does allow for demolition of the existing cinema in the event that the developer is unable to secure a new operator. It would not be reasonable to prevent the redevelopment progressing by preventing demolition of the existing cinema if the developer is genuinely unable to secure a future operator. However, British Land remain committed to securing the future provision of a cinema as part of the redevelopment, and officers will robustly scrutinise this process as part of the Section 106 legal obligation. Zone F is bound by the west to the public highway of Surrey Quays Road, beyond which is Surrey Quays Shopping Centre, the Dock and Canada Water Retail Park. Unit 1 and 4 of the Canada Water Retail Park currently comprises a range of meanwhile uses, but this site is subject to commercial redevelopment proposals, which received a resolution to grant from the Planning Committee in March this year. To the northeast of Zone F is the Printworks building, which recently received detailed planning permission for commercial redevelopment. To the south of the site is the remainder of the leisure park, which is subject to redevelopment of the British Land Master Plan. The site is not located within a conservation area, nor within the curtilage of a listed building. In the wider vicinity, there are existing dwellings and the Alfred Salter School. As shown on this slide, the outline planning permission defines a range of potential uses and maximum floor space caps which can be delivered within each zone, as well as an overall cap for the master plan site. The outline permission allowed for Zone F to accommodate retail, workspace and residential uses. This reserved matters application is entirely consistent with the outline approval in terms of land use and quantum of development, and the detailed design reflects the principles established by the design code. An appropriate unit mix for each zone was secured in the Section 106 agreement at outline stage. The proposed unit size mix accords with that obligation. The delivery of 410 residential dwellings would make a significant contribution to this part of the borough. Whilst there are no affordable dwellings in this plot, the affordable provision across the master plan as a whole will be policy compliant, as you heard in the previous presentation. The proposal has the potential to deliver a minimum of 2,225 full-time jobs. This level of employment would make a valuable contribution to the borough and should be regarded as a significant positive benefit of the scheme. A policy-compliant provision of construction and end-use employment and training opportunities was secured as part of the outline permission. Affordable workspace has also been secured. Retail and cafe uses are allowed for within the approved development specification. The proposed location will activate the adjacent public realm, making a positive contribution to the success of the town centre, both in economic and place-making terms. This slide shows the proposed ground floor layout with buildings F1 and F2 separated by the higher cut. Once complete, the zone will be accessed from Surrey Quays Road to the west, New Brunswick Street, a newly created street to the northeast, and Park Walk, a new vehicular-free street to the east of the zone. The detailed design for Park Walk and New Brunswick Street will be secured under separate reserved matters applications. F1, the taller of the two buildings at 37 storeys, would occupy the southern part of the development zone. This building comprises flexible retail or workspace units fronting onto Surrey Quays Road, the higher cut and Park Walk, with a residential lobby accessed from Park Walk Place. F2 comprises the 10-storey office podium building and a 34-storey residential tower. At ground floor, this building also comprises flexible retail or workspace units, as well as a generous office lobby, with the residential lobby being accessed from New Brunswick Street. It is proposed to have one internal loading bay within building F2, accessed from Surrey Quays Road. This slide shows the layout of the upper floors. The top left image shows the first level of residential accommodation comprising cycle storage in F1 and the start of individual units in the F2 tower. Large office floor plates are provided from 1st to 10th floor level in the podium building for F2. As you can see from the bottom right image, the roof of the podium building will be utilised for a combination of communal terraces and biodiverse living roofs. This slide shows some of the typical residential layouts to demonstrate the quality of the units and the high standard of amenity which will be enjoyed by future residents, including occupiers of the wheelchair units. This scheme proposes 31 studios, 131 beds, 209 two beds and 38 three beds. 45 wheelchair units are proposed. The standard of accommodation to be provided will be of a high quality, with all units meeting Southwark standards in terms of unit size, all having a good layout and adequate storage and good levels of outlook and privacy. The tower elements of both F1 and F2 have been designed with chamfered corners, which allows the introduction of a second aspect to all but one studio unit. Balconies to each of the units are accommodated in large cuts, which allows windows within them to provide additional aspects, whilst at the same time protecting privacy between the adjoining units. The units provided within the lower floors of F1, particularly those facing into the higher cut, will have more restricted views. However, the internal layout is good, opportunities for second aspects have been maximised, and the standard of amenity will be high. The distance between facades meets Southwark's minimum standards. Overall, the scheme would only have 4% of units that are single aspect. The level of daylight and sunlight to be enjoyed by future occupiers has been set out in detail in the report. A high level of compliance with the BRE recommended targets will be achieved. The purpose of this slide is to identify the location of various shared terraces for the office and residential components. With the exception of a single studio at second floor level within F1, every unit has access to private external balconies. All but 4 of the 3-bed units would have a 10 square metre private balcony. The 4 non-compliant units would still have a balcony provision of 9.5 square metres. The majority of the studio 1 and 2-bed units would have balconies measuring 9.5 square metres. In addition to private space, both blocks would have generous provision of communal amenity space. The proposal would deliver in excess of 410 square metres of communal outdoor amenity space across a series of roof terraces. This is 95 square metres more than the minimum requirement and should be seen as a benefit of the proposal. The amenity areas provide a variety of spaces for relaxing, socialising and sitting out, and in the case of the 34th floor roof terrace, expansive views across London. In addition, F1 has 3 indoor communal amenity areas, which have not been counted in the total amenity space calculations, but these would provide additional spaces for residents to utilise. The development generates a requirement for 350 square metres of children's play space across all ages. This will be met in full on site. The Outline Planning Permission was not subject to an urban greening factor assessment as it predated the formal adoption of the current London or Southwark development plans. Nevertheless, at the time of granting the Outline Planning Permission, significant enhancements were secured in respect of landscaping, habitat and ecology enhancement, as well as tree planting across the whole master plan site. The proposal for this plot provides landscaped areas across a series of podium and roof terraces for both the commercial and residential occupiers, and within the areas of public realm within the zone, fronting Surrey Quays Road, within the higher cut and Park Walk Place. In terms of urban greening factor calculations, a target score of 0.35 is appropriate for mixed-use sites. The podium landscape would achieve a score of 0.34. Due to the function of the ground floor public realm, the need for extensive areas of hard landscape and constraints imposed by the built form, the ground floor public realm for this particular plot would only achieve a score of 0.15, which reduces the overall score. Whilst this falls below the policy target, as we've heard before, soft landscape has been maximised, and it is appropriate to take into account the wider context, whereby extensive areas of public realm will be provided outside of the red line boundary for this particular application. This slide shows an indicative urban greening factor score for the central quarter of the master plan site and demonstrates that this part of the site would be capable of achieving targets. This slide shows the approach taken to massing, scale and form of the building. F1 would have an AOD height of 125 metres and F2 a height of 115.5 metres. The location and height of the towers and the footprint and mass of the blocks falls within the approved outline parameters, and as such what remains to be determined as part of this reserved matters is the design quality. The F1 and F2 towers form a pair of slender buildings with octagonal forms which are rotated at 45 degrees to each other, thereby creating visual interest and interplay between the towers. The rotation also ensures that the orientation of F1 relates to the axis of Park Walk, with the residential entrance facing onto Park Walk Place. Similarly, the orientation of F2 relates to the public park, with the residential entrance having a prominent position onto New Brunswick Street and the park immediately to the north. Both towers have chamfered corners, which increases their sense of slenderness, whilst their inset balconies help to further accentuate the tower's vertical forms. The nib buildings give a more human scale to the development, adding interest and responding well to the curvature of Surrey Quays Road. Overall, the scale and mass is appropriate for this context and compliant with the outline planning permission. The architectural style and materials palette has been subject to extensive negotiation with officers to ensure exemplary design quality. The residential elements will be clad in glazed tiles for the towers. The glazed tiles will vary across a gentle range of green and blue tones. The lower nib buildings will use more solid, reflective glazed bricks, which are smaller in scale, helping to create a more solid base. The office element will comprise of red and grey concrete as a unique contrast to the blue glazed towers. Careful consideration has been given to the design of the base of each building, the fenestration proportions and style, and to the crown of each tower. The chosen architectural style and materials palette is appropriate for the intended use and responds well to the emerging character of the area. The images on this slide are intended to show the design quality that the buildings will make a significant positive contribution to the townscape and character of the area. The images on this slide show how the development would be viewed from the park within the master plan, and you can see the recently approved Printworks conversion in the surrounding context. A town and visual impact assessment was submitted, and this has been discussed in detail in the report. The images on this slide show a selection of key views. This development is shown in blue, with other towers forming part of the master plan. The impact of tall buildings in this location and upon these views was robustly assessed and deemed to be acceptable when the outline planning permission was granted. The heritage impact of the redevelopment of the Canada Water Master Plan site was robustly considered as part of the outline planning permission. The impact was deemed to be acceptable. This reserved matters application does not introduce any new considerations in respect of impact on views or heritage assets. A key public route would be provided through Zone F, linking Surrey Quays Road to the future park, the route known as the Higher Cut. Given its position between two tall buildings, the route will be shaded for much of the day, and woodland planting and shade-tolerant species are proposed. Raised planters and benches and seating areas are proposed, and it is envisaged that the retail units, which could include food and drink uses, will be able to provide additional tables and chairs, allowing them to spill out within this area. This route would be car-free, except for emergency vehicles and 2 blue badge parking spaces. A condition is recommended in the addendum requiring the parking spaces to be removed if they are not needed for wheelchair occupiers. This piece of public ground will make a significant contribution to the permeability and character of the town centre as it evolves. The images on this slide show the design intent and principles for the higher cut. The detailed proposals for soft and hard landscape, planting, seating and lighting will be submitted under conditions. This important public route will form part of the public realm captured by Schedule 18 of the Section 106 agreement, which sets out controls in respect of standards of construction, maintenance, access and permitted closures. This reserved matters application seeks detail approval for temporary landscaping works within Parkwalk Place at the entrance to F1. Details of the permanent landscape design surrounding the building will come forward as part of separate future reserved matters applications for Parkwalk, which runs to the east of Zone F. Parkwalk is proposed to be a pedestrianised street with expansive and varied planting and seating areas throughout. The temporary proposals for Parkwalk Place comprise a temporary resin-bound gravel surface with planters and trees, which will provide wind mitigation, providing space for people to sit. The temporary landscaping and public realm also ensures that emergency vehicles can access F1 if necessary. New tree planting is proposed along the length of Zone F on Surrey Quays Road, and a generous footpath is also proposed. Seating and visitor cycle parking will be integrated into pockets in the planting. A reserved matters application has been submitted for New Brunswick Street, which runs to the north of F2 and Printworks Place. This will form the public realm area immediately outside of the F2 office entrance. The submitted details show that Printworks Place has been designed as a key intersection, an area of public realm between the park neighbourhood, central cluster and town centre, as defined in the outline planning permission. The space has been designed for pedestrians and cyclists and will provide planting, seating and opportunities for public art, with the intention of creating a space to dwell, as well as providing an important link to the entrances of the Printworks building and F2. This application has not yet been approved. The building will respond positively to the future planned public realm surrounding the site. A full microclimate assessment was submitted with the application and has been covered in detail in the report. This slide shows that with wind mitigation measures in place, suitable conditions will be achieved within the public realm. Given the development zone's position within the central area of the Canada Water Master Plan, it is located a significant distance from the nearest existing residential properties. The closest identified residential properties are those within Brunswick Quay to the south of the site beyond Redriff Road. There are also existing residential properties within the Porter's Edge development, north of the development zone. Both are circa 100 metres from Zone F, and whilst the outlook from neighbouring properties would undoubtedly change, largely because of the form of the towers, it is not considered that the proposals would have any significant impact on existing residents' privacy or outlook. Sufficient distance would be retained between the buildings on this plot and the existing and proposed commercial units on the Art Invest site to prevent any harm arising. Mixed-use commercial and residential blocks are proposed as part of the BL Master Plan on adjacent plots D and G. As those plots are developed, they will be designed to take account of the relationship with plot F. A distance of 22 to 37 metres would be retained between plot F and the recently approved Printworks building. The impact of the development in terms of daylight and sunlight was assessed and deemed to be acceptable as part of the outline planning permission. At that time, a building envelope in terms of the maximum height and footprint of buildings on this plot was established, having taken account of known development on neighbouring sites and the relationship with other parts of the master plan. Given the assessment undertaken at outline stage, it would not be reasonable to reassess that impact as part of the reserved matters application, unless there has been a significant change in baseline conditions or a significant change to the worst case scenario tested at outline stage. Subject to conditions to control detailed operation and servicing hours and soundproofing, the proposal would not give rise to significant harm to neighbouring amenity by way of overlooking, loss of privacy, noise or disturbance. Matters of wind, ecology, solar glare, air quality and flood risk were fully considered at outline stage and were also addressed as part of the ES Statement of Conformity submitted with this application, as discussed in detail in the report. In terms of sustainability, a site-wide approach to energy and carbon emission reductions was approved as part of the outline planning permission. An up-to-date energy assessment was submitted with this application, as well as whole-life carbon assessment and circular economy statements to address current policy requirements. The development has been designed to minimise embodied and operational carbon as much as possible, maximising natural ventilation and energy-efficient heat recovery. The development would achieve BREEAM Excellent and a carbon saving of 64.9% for the residential and 43% for the commercial elements on site, with the remainder offset by way of a carbon green fund contribution. The development proposes an all-electric system using water and air source heat pumps. In terms of transport, the development would be car-free except for blue badge parking, servicing and deliveries. Substantial contributions were secured at outline planning permission stage towards sustainable transport improvements. Additional conditions are recommended in respect of appropriate servicing hours, given the proximity of the site to the new residential dwellings. Consultation responses and third-party objections have been set out in detail in the report. At the time of publication of the committee report, a total of 4 representations had been received. There were 3 objections and 1 neutral comment. Issues raised have been set out in detail in the report and have been addressed in the assessment of the application. Objections relate to the question as to whether there is still a demand for office space in London, impacts upon infrastructure, transport, sustainability and design. For the reasons set out in the report and discussed in this presentation, the proposal is considered to be acceptable in terms of design, sustainability, transport and impact on neighbours. Furthermore, there is no evidence to suggest a lack of demand for high-quality office space within town centres, and in any event, the provision of office space is entirely consistent with the outline planning permission. The Section 106 agreement attached to the outline permission, to which this reserved matters will be bound, includes a significant package of mitigation by way of on-site improvements and financial contributions to mitigate the impact of the development. In conclusion, for the reasons set out in the report and discussed in this presentation, this proposal is considered to be a positive form of development for the borough. The proposal accords with the outline planning permission and relevant development plan policies in respect of land use and quantum of development and residential design standards. An EIA statement of conformity has been provided to demonstrate that the assumptions, conclusions and mitigations secured at outline stage are still fit for purpose, and that this reserved matters would not give rise to new significant effects. The development would deliver 410 new residential units, which would make a valuable contribution to the housing stock in this area. The proposed development would deliver a significant amount of commercial floor space, creating the potential for a minimum of 2,225 jobs, which is also a positive contribution. Obligations secured as part of the outline planning permission include the provision of affordable retail and workspace within the master plan development, and those uses could come forward within this phase. In design terms, the proposed building accords with the principles and maximum height parameters established by the outline planning permission, and the design is considered to be exemplary. Subject to the necessary mitigation already secured as part of the outline planning permission, the proposal would not give rise to unacceptable transport impacts. Subject to compliance with the detailed energy and sustainability strategies submitted and payment of the Carbon Green Fund, the development satisfactorily addresses climate change policies. It is therefore recommended that planning permission be granted for this reserved matters application, subject to the recommended additional conditions as set out in the draft recommendation that was circulated as part of the addendum this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Leeming.
This question, of course, doesn't just refer to tonight, but I hear a lot of times I come to this committee that you have considered the height of a building and it's deemed to be acceptable. I'm just wondering what the factors in play are when the height of a building is deemed to be acceptable.
Thank you, Chair. I'll pick that question up. It's in the outline permission. There was a distribution of height around the master plan, which was tested by way of specific views that protected heritage assets in and around London, as well as local views, local conservation areas and so on. There is a strategic view that traverses across the site over the top of the Canada Water Basin and largely over the top of the current shopping centre, which means that height is distributed to the side, to the east and west side of the basin in two broadly two clusters, one around Ontario Towers and the Canada Water tube station, and one around this plot, in fact, and plot D. So that's the sort of core, if you like, of the master plan, and has the greatest concentration of height. So with height being distributed around and feathering down towards the edges of the master plan. So that's what is sort of what we're reporting to you here, that those heights that were agreed and set within the master plan defined exactly, not just sort of broad heights for the various plots, but actually had quite specific parameters for where the tallest elements should be located, and a sort of footprint of 30 by 30 meters and a height parameter was set within that master plan. And so what's being reported to you here is that the building in detail is sitting well within those outlines as agreed, and therefore acceptable in outline planning permission terms.
Councillor Whittam.
I have two totally unrelated questions to each other. The first question is, how long do they have to look for a cinema provider before we say we'll let you off? That's my first question.
So there is a kind of a two-layer approach secured in the Section 106 agreement, and they were required to demonstrate how they were getting on at a 9-month mark, so 9 months following issue of the permission, and then there's a further 18 months, so it's a period of 21 months in total. So we've already had the evidence for the first trigger, and at that point the British Land were able to demonstrate that they couldn't secure an operator, but they still remain committed to doing that, and I believe that that work is kind of ongoing. So British Land are here tonight and they can talk to you about what they're doing, but we haven't seen the second tranche of evidence. We'll probably get that towards the end of this year. We will robustly scrutinise that to make sure that it's been very thorough. But of course it is quite difficult times for cinema operators at the moment. So that's I hope that explains that there was a kind of a double layer to it, but it might be worth posing a question to BL around how they're getting on.
My second question is about the microclimate around the high cut. You say that nothing has changed since the outline planning was passed, but we didn't know the shape of this building or the detail of how far between the buildings there was for this microclimate to swirl around. And I notice on paragraph 141 it says in particular there would be locations with occurrences of strong winds with the potential to be a safety concern to more vulnerable pedestrians and cyclists south of development plot F1 within Park Walk Place in the higher cut and on Surrey Quays Road northwest of development plot F2. That cannot have been known fully at the outline planning. So it should be a material consideration for us to determine tonight.
Yep,
and I would argue that planting a few trees and putting a few pots in does not mitigate against vulnerable pedestrians and cyclists being blown away.
I can come back on that to answer. So obviously because the detail of individual plots wasn't known at outline stage, at that stage it was identified that there would be a need as part of the reserved matters applications for wind assessments to be undertaken. So this is new information that's come forward as part of the reserved matters. So it's a fully detailed microclimate assessment based on the Lawson criteria, which is the way that the industry way of measuring pedestrian comfort conditions. So you're right that we didn't have that information at outline stage based on this particular proposal, because we're only getting to that point now. But we have had a very detailed assessment, and that assessment demonstrates that with wind mitigation measures in place, the conditions would be comfortable for sitting and strolling. So that's what that slide shows that we're looking at now. There is a condition in place requiring detailed wind strategies to be submitted to us as part of the landscaping proposals. It isn't uncommon in urban areas with tall buildings for there to be potential wind issues that have to be mitigated by way of the detailed design of buildings and landscaping. So that's kind of something that we're quite familiar with. It's an approach that we have to take for kind of most urban developments. And I mean, I don't know if you might want to say something else about that, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, in my experience, there are. I mean, trees do significantly assist with wind mitigation in the public realm, and so the location of trees can be tweaked and adjusted through the detailed landscaping of an area to address specific wind mitigation issues. The detailed design, you're right, the detailed design of the building also works towards wind mitigation, the sort of roughness of the building and the degree to which it sort of slows down the wind and deals with wind. But certainly the higher cut is an area that we would be looking specifically for wind mitigation measures, because it's the kind of thing that would channel wind and that's why the condition was placed as a sort of post. We could look at that as in detail when we have the landscape condition is one that comes towards the end of the construction period and can deal with a much more sort of live assessment of the wind implications.
Can I just yes, Councillor Wisdom, and of course the other thing pointed out in the report is that paragraph 142 is that the wind conditions are slightly worse because the other parts of the master plan wouldn't have come forward or have not been assessed as having come forward, just to make a worst case, if you like. So when the rest of the master plan is built out, the wind conditions are significantly reduced because the sheltering the buildings southwesterly of this building provide. But what the applicant's done is say, well, okay, if without those buildings in place, they're designing the mitigation to reduce the condition without those buildings there, but in due course those buildings will appear, and that will have a significant effect, which would, kind of make it all in the region of comfortable, even without that mitigation. But so it's a bit like the discussion we were having earlier about how you manage the master plan as it's delivered over time.
Yeah, Councillor Wisdom.
Another thing with the high cut is, with all these extra trees and hiding places, how does that affect the secure by design principles within that area?
Okay, so what we've seen at the moment, the level of detail that we have shows the design intent and the principles for this space, so that it should be largely a pedestrian space. We will look to maximise planting because of the benefits of soft landscape. However, we don't have the minutiae of detail in terms of the landscaping, because that comes forward as part of the conditions. But certainly when we do have those landscaping conditions, security and secure by design is kind of at the forefront of our minds when we're looking at the acceptability of that. We have consulted our Secure by Design officer on this particular reserved matters application, and their comments are in the report, and you know, they are working with the developer. They welcome that involvement from an early stage, and they will certainly let us know if they have any concerns with the proposal. There's a condition requiring the developer to achieve Secure by Design accreditation, so they are required to do that, and that should give you the comfort that Secure by Design officers will be looking at this scheme in detail, and they will influence those proposals.
Chair, if I could add to that, I mean the high cut is a through route which connects Surrey Quays Road, a main road, and the Park Walk, which is going to be a busy pedestrian thoroughfare with large shops and the main sort of shopping precinct, if you like, of the Canada Water Master Plan. With a lot of these, Secure by Design is all about visibility, lighting, and what we call natural surveillance, which arises from the route being lined on either side by retail public uses. So and that's been designed in to the design of the buildings, and not just the landscaping of the route itself. So there are, in that respect, there's no sort of dark corners where someone might hide, or those issues of Secure by Design which arise in instances and need additional mitigation. But as my colleague said, they will be reassessed and looked at again by way of Secure by Design when we have the actual detailed design come forward.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Gemma, a question on behalf of everybody's gran. How are we securing continued bingo provision?
It is in the Section 106, but I have to confess I can't remember what it says, so I've got it here and I can look it up and come back to you. Just there's a lot to remember. I'll look this up now and I'll come back.
But this site doesn't affect the bingo hall itself. It's just a cinema, doesn't it? I think.
There's a cut off.
Yeah. There will be a future scheme that comes forward, which we'll do absolutely. Which does lead me to the question that I wanted to ask, and it does tie into a point that the Councillor Whittam made earlier, which was, do we think the 9 plus 12 months that you identified in terms of the cinema is sufficient? And I mean, obviously, when the scheme originally came forward for Canada Water, we had no idea then what the impact of COVID and the pandemic was going to be. We know that cinemas are still very much in the process of recovering post-pandemic, and none of us know quite where that will land. But we do know that before the pandemic, this was a very popular cinema which had a very important role in the local community for young people and for families, being a relatively inexpensive cinema chain as well. And so it had a very important part in the social life in SE16 and further afield. So it's really understanding whether we think, given we've already got through the first 9 months, whether we think another 12 months is sufficient.
I think if we're going to be completely transparent about this, there isn't an opportunity really for us to decide at reserved matter stage whether or not it's sufficient. We've negotiated the terms of the Section 106 agreement based on the outline planning permission, and that's what the developer is obligated to do, and we will robustly scrutinise that and make sure that they have gone as far as we can make them go, but we certainly don't have the opportunity to revisit that obligation as part of the reserved matters application.
That's helpful, thank you. Well, it's sort of helpful. It's helpful in clarifying it. Thank you. Do we have any objectors in the audience to this application? I don't see any. Could we have the applicants and the applicant's agent come forward, please? Okay, so again, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, and I'll give you 3 minutes with which to present.
Good evening. I'm Phil Tate, the Director of Development for the Canada Water Master Plan.
Hello again. Just for the benefit of everyone that's listening in, Natalie Render, Associate Director at DP9, Planning Consultant.
Good evening. I'd like to start by saying thank you for approving Zone L just now, and indeed the print works 2 weeks ago. As you heard from my colleague James, those two schemes, along with Zone F, will help to complete the northeastern edge of the master plan, linking Canada Water Dock to K1, an incredibly important step. Together, Zones F, H and L represent over 150,000 square metres of development and demonstrate a clear commitment from British Land to deliver the master plan in a cohesive and well-planned manner. Alongside Zone G and the new park, which we hope to bring to committee later this year, they will create the critical mass required to deliver the new town centre and neighbourhood that the outline planning permission enables. Zone F itself has been subject to detailed pre-application discussions and public consultation. The proposals comprise 410 new homes delivered between 2 residential towers and 39,000 square metres of new office floor space, providing up to 2,900 jobs. The building also includes smaller, flexibly designed spaces which could accommodate affordable workspace and affordable retail. Additionally, the proposals incorporate new areas of high quality public realm, disabled car parking, cycle parking and tree planting, consistent with our overall urban greening objectives. As with all our buildings, Zone F has been designed to be highly energy efficient and sustainable, incorporating many passive and active measures to reduce carbon emissions in line with planning policy requirements and our own industry-leading corporate sustainability strategy. Zone F has an important role to play in the master plan. It is an important transition between the new high street, with its predominance of retail and office floor space, and to the residential neighbourhood around the new park. The award-winning architectural practice, AHMM, has designed a building which manages this transition in a highly successful way, and we ask that you grant planning permission this evening so that we can continue to deliver the master plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Whittam.
Do you think the high cut is fit for purpose?
I think the high cut is a good quality, high quality landscape space that indeed does serve its purpose in terms of joining the main park that cuts over the road to Park Walk.
Doesn't it worry you that vulnerable pedestrians and cyclists might be disadvantaged or even have accidents because of the wind?
Should I take that one? Yep. So, obviously you've heard from officers in terms of the wind mitigation and impact and sort of how that's been reported within the committee report. It's not anticipated that there will be adverse wind impacts in the higher cut with that mitigation that has been discussed earlier this evening in place. I'm not sure that there's much more we can say beyond the assessment that's been presented in the report and sort of the mitigation that is being proposed. We hope that that's sufficient to sort of give members the comfort that the conditions in that particular part of this development zone are going to be satisfactory with the mitigation in place.
Thank you. Councillor Papula.
I wanted to find out whether if British Land were open in extending their time in finding a cinema operator for the area.
I think it's something that would be discussed outside the remit of this permission, given our application allows for our current position. We have been in constant dialogue with our cinema operators across our wider portfolio, and it's difficult to ignore the impact of the pandemic on those, particularly the larger multi-screen operators, which is what our condition requires us to do. If you look in the news, most of those big operators just now are in financial distress. They have billion-dollar debts. Their lenders are taking positions on their own structuring. That something is real and we have to think about. We, as an organisation, and it's in our business interests, want to put a cinema into the town centre. We see it as part of a vibrant, exciting mix of a successful town centre environment. The format may be slightly different, and that's something we'd welcome the conversation with officers to talk about in due course.
Councillor Leeming.
I see you've got 1,248 bicycle parking spaces. Now, I may have misunderstood one of the diagrams, but it seemed that they were not on the ground floor and on the first floor. If that is the case, and I haven't misunderstood the diagram, how are you enabling people to transfer their bicycles upstairs?
I'm happy to take that, actually. Sorry, I didn't quite get the start there. The cycle parking. I can cover both uses. We've got residential and we've got commercial. In the commercial space, you come in at ground floor, and there's two parking spaces, cycle spaces. One is half a lift up, a run of steps up, half a run of steps down. Both have lift provisions also as well, and also ramps on those steps to push up. It's half a flight of stairs in each case. On the residential, we have actually put them in the first floor. We took a conscious decision to do that rather than allocate them in back of house space and in basement spaces. We wanted them to use the same doors that the main residents use, so they feel part of that process, part of that entrance journey. There are steps up with ramps and rails for the cycles, but also there is lifts as well, sized appropriately for rush hours and residential accommodation.
Will they take family-sized cargo bikes, which, if there are families wanting to travel sustainably, so you see them, these are quite large,
yes,
often very heavy?
Yes, is the quick response to that.
Any further questions from committee? No, thank you. You may return to the public gallery. Thank you for your contribution tonight. Do we have anybody in the audience that is a supporter of the proposals that lives within 100 metres of a scheme? We do not. We don't have any ward councillors other than those that are on the committee, so we won't take any contributions there. That leaves us to any further questions following those discussions you may have for officers. Councillor Whittam.
I just wanted to come back to the urban greening factor again. We're seeing less than 0.4, and again, I presume we've got the same explanation. And again, I just like to make sure that we don't double count.
Yes, same position. So, I mean, I think the key message to take away here is, as a whole piece, as the redevelopment of the entire town centre will hit urban greening factor targets, even though there isn't actually a firm requirement for the developer to do that because it didn't exist at the time the outline planning permission was granted. So, but nevertheless, they are very committed to achieving that target. We just can't look at it on a plot by plot basis because of the way the site's carved up. So what we have from the developer is the kind of that comfort, the indicative assessment of proportions of the site to show how it could be achieved, and then we have what will actually be achieved within each red line boundary. And it is clear that there will be significant urban greening factor benefits, biodiversity net gains, a significant increase in landscaping across the town centre as a whole. It's just that we need to see that come out and evolve as each piece of the puzzle comes forward. So yes, we won't be double counting in that respect. We will always be revisiting this as a priority with every reserved matters application, and we will be conditioning compliance with those details that are provided to us. So we are aware that this is a very important element, and we will be robust about enforcing that. Shall I answer the bingo thing now? Yeah. So the obligation around the bingo hall is slightly different. So there is not an absolute obligation for the developer to re-provide a bingo hall. So it's different to the cinema obligation. What the Section 106 says is that if the developer chooses to construct a leisure unit that could be used for a bingo hall, they will give first right of refusal to the current operator, and they will demonstrate to us that they have done that. But that's slightly different in that they're not actually required to provide a bingo hall. It's just that if they chose to do so, they would offer it to the current occupier and current operator on site. So it's a lesser obligation than the cinema. But again, that was obviously deemed to be acceptable at the outline planning permission stage. So it wouldn't be reasonable for us to try and revisit that now.
Just to add to that, Chair, it is a 3-month time-limited offer because obviously the developer can't keep that offer open, in perpetuity. So at some point they've got to decide what to do with the space. So that's why the existing bingo operator's got 3 months to take up the offer or not.
And presumably the site, is that would be a site in Area D? Is that when that potentially would come forward? Or do we not know?
Sorry, we all know quickly. Well, actually, BL probably know the immediate answer to this. Where it could, but the current bingo operator, is that your question? Where is?
No, because I think.
Oh, where could it be? Sorry.
Where could it
Sorry, I
be
misunderstood
provided
that.
in the future?
Yeah. So in in this slide, you can see where leisure uses could come forward within any of the plots. So it's a bit small to see, isn't it? It could. So D and E would be the plots to the left. So those very town centre located plots.
Where the current shopping centre is, basically. Yeah. Thank you. Any further questions? Any further comments from committee? No. In that case, I'm going to move forward to a resolution on this matter. I would like to move that we adopt the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraphs 1 to 3 of the report on page 239 of the main agenda pack. Firstly, that planning permission be granted subject to the additional conditions and informatives as set out in the draft recommendation at Appendix 1 and amended by the addendum report. Secondly, it should be noted that this reserves matters application is bound by the Section 106 legal agreement and conditions attached to the outline planning permission 18/AP/1604. Thirdly, that environmental information be taken into account as required by Regulation 26(1) of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2011 as amended. Does any member of the committee wish to second this recommendation? Councillor Leeming, thank you. So we'll move to a vote. Councillor Whittam.
Abstain.
Councillor Johnson.
For, Chair.
Councillor Leeming.
For, Chair.
Councillor Papula.
For, Chair.
Councillor Roberts.
Abstain, Chair.
And I'm Councillor Livingstone, and I'm voting for the recommendation. So the motion is carried. The application is granted. That brings us to the end of this evening's proceedings. Thank you for everybody's endurance. I know it's been a long one, but I hope everybody has an enjoyable summer break. Take care.